It was a love affair born in the Bayou.
She was a stunning young woman. She came from a very loving family. She had a beautiful smile that just took you in.
He took one look at her and fell head over heels.
Together, their lives seemed unstoppable. Until a daylight abduction hit them like a hurricane.
There's a woman missing. Her family wants to know where she is, and we have got to close in this circle. So when you hear the word kidnapping, everybody's immediately on guard.
But as a stunned community holds its breath, a family springs into action.
The family pulled out all the stops, four-wheelers, social media, whatever they could use to search for their loved one, they did.
As they're speeding on the ATVs toward the home, they hear this screaming.
I'm hearing a holler, help, you're killing me, you're killing me.
That's when the first shot was fired.
There are some times where everything just immediately gets cranked up to 10, and that was this case.
Everything happened so fast, nobody knew what was going on inside that house.
But shock and confusion definitely was the main thing in that moment.
November 6, 2013. It's a warm, humid afternoon in the capital of Cajun country, Lafayette, Louisiana.
Yeah, Cajun Creole kind of style, we're good for the food, hospitality, and just always having a great time, very friendly.
Down on Madeline Street, Lafayette resident Demetria Robinson is heading home after her shift.
It was a normal November day. I had just gotten off of work.
Demetria crosses the street to her house, and shortly after she gets home, she hears a commotion outside of the community daycare facility across the street.
I was standing outside, and I just hear noise, and I just seen this car, and this woman, she was blowing her horn. And I was like, what's going on?
All of a sudden, you see two adults fighting. There's a woman literally trying to fight for her life, pleading for help.
Please help.
Pleading for anyone to help her and her child.
Leave her alone.
He's on top of her, and the baby is under her.
Mind your business.
And her eyes just looking at me saying help. But in that same instant, you look at the baby, he's crying, looking at me. It was just a crazy situation.
In that split second, Demetria makes a fateful decision.
I said a little prayer to myself. I said, God, just help me to get the baby. If you want me to get the baby, just help me. In some kind of way, I was just able to reach and just get the baby. And I made sure the baby was okay. And I took him into safety.
The man took the woman and drove off, holding onto the steering wheel and her by the back of her head. So a lot of questions are running through people's mind, but through it all, they are in shock and they are confused.
Within minutes, Lafayette dispatchers are flooded with 911 calls.
There's a man beating a woman over here.
Police race to the scene of the attack and are immediately thrust into an unbelievable manhunt where every last second counts and where one young mother's life hangs in the balance between life and death.
In southern Louisiana, no one will ever forget the name Bethany Arsenault.
Born in 1983, Bethany Arsenault was raised in Duson, Louisiana, a small farming community on the outskirts of Lafayette.
It's country. It's very country, and everybody's related. Everybody's related in the area. Everybody knows everybody.
The Arsenault clan was no different, and Bethany grew up surrounded by a large extended family.
She had this big, tight-knit family. There were always lots of cousins and friends around, cookouts, family dinners, and they genuinely loved and supported one another.
By the time Bethany entered high school, she had grown into a beautiful young woman with electric eyes and a magnetic personality.
Bethany was really a strikingly beautiful young lady. She was 5'8", had these glowing eyes, and just exuded an alluring, attractive energy.
She was smart, sweet, drop-dead gorgeous, and of course, more than one young man found her irresistible.
Like a lot of young women her age, after high school, Bethany dated a few guys, but true love remained elusive.
During her early 20s, she worked and had a couple of boyfriends, but for whatever reason, those relationships didn't work out.
She came from a great family. She wanted a family of her own someday, but of course, it's not always easy to find Mr. Right, especially in a small town.
But then in 2010, at the age of 26,
Hey, Bethany.
Bethany ran into an old family friend,
My friend Scott, right?
Yes.
Scott Thomas.
Scott and Bethany had met a few years earlier. He was friends with her cousin Marcus, and her brother Victor knew him.
How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Long time no see.
Like Bethany, he was 26, hardworking, and came from a good family in nearby Leonville, Louisiana. Scott was charming, funny, and sweet. And best of all, he was single like her.
So when you gonna hang out?
We're hanging out right now.
I'm talking one-on-one time.
So.
Soon? I hope it's sooner than later.
Given Scott's history with her family, there was a real comfort level between them. Bethany felt like she could trust him, that he was a good guy, and when they went out together, they just clicked.
Their connection was just electric and immediate, and Scott just couldn't spend enough time with Bethany.
He was a guy in love.
They were both young, good-looking, and fun. They spent a lot of time together.
Within a few months, Scott and Bethany moved into a home together in Leonville, Louisiana, about 30 miles from Bethany's family.
This is what Scott wanted. He wanted them to live together. He wanted them to build a family together.
A wish that came true in 2011 when their son Jackson was born.
Scott and Bethany had a beautiful little boy. And like any couple with a new baby, at that time, they were very, very happy together.
But as much as Scott and Bethany adored their son, life under the same roof wasn't always perfect.
Scott loved Bethany very much, but he could be a little emotionally up and down, a little suffocating, and on top of all that, Bethany was used to being closer to her family and was feeling a little disconnected.
Ultimately, in June of 2013, they both decided it would be best if they went their separate ways. Scott stayed in Leonville, and Bethany went back to Tucson to be closer to her family.
They shared custody. Bethany had primary custody, but Scott was definitely in the picture.
Bethany was working with him. He was seeing his son. She just didn't want it to be involved with him on an intimate level.
Honestly, it seemed like they were back to being good friends, family friends, who just so happened to have a beautiful young son together.
But just when it seemed like Bethany and Scott were back on even keel, a shocking chain of events ripped their lives apart. It begins that fateful November day in 2013.
Here is this beautiful young mother attacked and abducted in broad daylight.
It was just a crazy situation.
A situation that would leave a community holding its breath and wondering what kind of monster might be lurking in their midst.
This was the third abduction in a year in the community, and there was a real fear that the same person was responsible.
After a mutual breakup with her boyfriend, Scott Thomas, newly single mother Bethany Arsenault was ready and willing to take on the world.
She was a beautiful 29-year-old woman. She had an adorable son, and she had her whole life in front of her.
But just as life was looking up, an unspeakable horror rips Bethany's life apart.
On November 6, 2013, Bethany was violently abducted outside a daycare center in Lafayette, Louisiana.
Everybody was really shocked and believe that's happening.
There was a lot of confusion as to just what was going on. Whether it was a kidnapping, a carjacking. All that was known was that a male had a female and took off with her. And there was a child involved, and the child had been rescued.
As responding officers try to ascertain the situation, eyewitnesses describe a chaotic and violent scene.
What did you see step by step?
I saw her get out the car with her son, and then he started pushing her into his car.
They said that there was an African-American male between 5'10", 6 feet tall. He grabbed the woman, threw her in the vehicle. It was a white Buick LeSabre.
It happened like so fast. I don't even remember seeing his face. The only thing that really sticks in my head is that girl eyes.
The police put out a statewide APB on the vehicle, but they only had a vague description of this man, and they had no idea what his motivations were.
And as for the car at the scene, police trace it back to Bethany Arsenault.
People don't know if these two know each other. Is this just a random guy? Is he someone who escaped from prison? Or is he a rapist?
So many things could have been going through their heads. You never know what could happen to that woman, to Bethany.
But as questions about Bethany's abduction begin to swirl, investigators are forced to face a sad new fact about life in Lafayette.
Lafayette is a pretty safe town. Like everywhere, it's got its good areas and its bad areas. But in the last few years, there have been some very upsetting crimes involving young women.
Mickey Shunick, a young woman riding her bicycle one night, she was forced into the vehicle. But that was one of the biggest cases here. Unfortunately, she was found in a shallow grave out in the middle of nowhere.
The Mickey Shunick case was a case that resonated with a lot of people. So when you hear the word kidnapping, everybody's immediately on guard, and they're thinking, what's the information that we need to know? What do we need to be on the lookout for?
But Mickey Shunick wasn't the only young woman to vanish from the area. 16-year-old Kiosha Felix also went missing in April of 2012. And Kiosha's case has even more parallels with Bethany's.
Like Bethany, Kiosha was from Tucson, Louisiana.
She was also mother of a 1-year-old. She vanished into thin air. The majority believe that she was either kidnapped or held against her will.
The answer as to where is Kiosha Felix is something that the community as a whole is still asking.
Consequently, authorities fear Bethany's abduction may not be an isolated incident.
This could be part of a pattern. It could be the work of a serial kidnapper, or even worse, a serial killer.
So in this instance, police have information about other missing persons cases in the area. They have details about these cases that the family members don't have that may be relevant to this case. And they have to seriously consider, are these crimes related?
I think that's when everybody was alarmed that it really was a scary situation.
As the search for Bethany intensifies, news of her abduction rolls across the local airwaves.
Our thought was, here's a missing person, here's a family that needs help. Let's get them the help they need.
It just made you wonder what was going on. And after I found out there was a little boy involved, it was just the sense of having a little boy of my own. What's going to happen to him now? Is his mom going to be found? What's going to happen? And then that's when it takes on a different aspect.
As fear spreads through the community, detectives reach out to the Arsenault family to inform them that Bethany has been abducted.
Their loved one was missing and they had no earthly idea where she was.
When you have a very close member of your family that's in that type of imminent danger, you want to do what you have to do to find her.
They were going to do everything in their power to find her, one way or the other.
In a community where blood is thicker than water, there's hope that Bethany's family will be able to find her. But with a trio of young women now missing, would their efforts be too little, too late?
I just thought in my mind that she was dead.
29-year-old Louisiana mom Bethany Arsenault hasn't been seen in the past couple of hours since an unknown assailant forced her into his car outside a daycare in Lafayette, Louisiana. And with 2 other local women missing and presumed dead, everyone in this quiet town is beginning to fear the worst.
Everyone's extremely worried about Bethany. This is a very public kidnapping, a very violent event, and no one knows where Bethany is, who did it, or even if she's still alive.
If it is a kidnapping, there are 2 people involved. There's the kidnapper and then there's the victim. The sooner you can find out what's going on, the sooner you can close in that circle.
With the clock ticking, Bethany's family hits the streets in search of their missing loved one.
She came from a large, loving family. I mean, the number of people out there searching for her, not giving up hope. They knew that also she was a fighter and wouldn't give up.
Hello? Hi. This is my cousin Bethany. She's been missing since yesterday. Have you seen her?
No, I haven't. I know y'all from around here, though. Such a good family. Let me know if there's anything I can do to help.
Thanks.
It was a large-scale effort. You did have Lafayette Police, and you also had the Lafayette Parish Sheriff's Office searching for her. And then the family was really doing a full-scale search. The family is doing everything that they can You know, we've had it in the paper. It's been on television. The police have put out alerts. So it's a community effort.
While Bethany's family goes door to door, investigators are still looking into the possibility that her case could be connected to the disappearances of Mickey Shunick and Kiosha Felix.
Like Bethany, these were two attractive women who just up and disappeared. So is it possible that the same person could be responsible for all three crimes?
But when investigators search for similarities between Bethany's disappearance and that of Mickey Shunick, they quickly hit a dead end.
Right away, they can eliminate any connection between Bethany's case and that of 21-year-old Mickey Shunick because a registered sex offender had been arrested and charged with Mickey's death. And at the time of Bethany's disappearance, he was behind bars.
However, Kiosha Felix's case isn't so cut and dry.
The answer as to where is Kiosha Felix is something that we and the journalistic community and the community as a whole is still asking.
She just disappeared into thin air.
Law enforcement probably wouldn't want to call it a cold case because I'm sure they're doing everything that they can, but the dozens of times that I checked up with law enforcement about it, there have been no leads.
While it's possible the individual who kidnapped Kiosha also abducted Bethany, there are some glaring differences between the perp's MO in each case.
Kiosha basically vanished into thin air. No one had seen her alleged kidnapping. It was the opposite of Bethany's abduction.
This was brazen in every sense of the word, not only because of the time of day, but with certain kidnappings, things are planned out. There is thought that has gone into it. This just seemed like either someone had snapped or someone had had enough.
But just who in Lafayette would want to abduct and perhaps kill Bethany Arsenault?
People don't know if these two know each other. Are they friends? Are they lovers? Is this just a random guy and they're trying to figure out what to do?
Before investigators have time to zero in on a suspect, officers stumble upon a huge discovery.
That looks like that white car they were looking for earlier.
On the night of November 6th, just 9 miles from the scene of Bethany's kidnapping, police found an abandoned white Buick LeSabre behind an oil production facility in Tucson. It was a rural area surrounded by woods and sugarcane fields.
They immediately search the area and find a woman's shirt on the ground and find additional clothing and blood in the vehicle.
I've got a footprint.
When authorities arrived, they saw 2 sets of footprints heading into the fields.
Somebody's barefoot and they're heading into the sugarcane.
But tracking the prints at night through towering sugarcane fields is no easy task.
That area, you look in sugarcane, probably 5.5, 6 foot tall. I mean, growing up as kids, we used to go play in it, treated it like a maze. It's very easy to run inside sugarcane and get lost.
Coupled with the challenges of the landscape, a recent rain had just fallen in the area.
They were not able to find any leads, and it probably had something to do with the weather conditions.
Because sunspots were still wet. Those fields hold water. But as far as to find footprints inside there, it's pretty rare.
Even though the footprints don't pan out, officers have better luck with the abandoned vehicle.
When police ran the plates on the Buick, they found that it belonged to Bethany's ex-boyfriend, Scott Thomas.
But could the doting father of Bethany's young son truly be behind her shocking abduction? If so, just what had pushed him over the brink? As investigators press for answers, an unexpected call is about to reignite a family's fading hope.
The family and authorities and volunteers are out searching tirelessly for Bethany. Then all of a sudden, the sister gets a phone call, and it's Bethany.
Police in Lafayette, Louisiana have just made a disturbing discovery in the search for beautiful mother Bethany Arsenault, who has been missing for 3 hours.
Law enforcement found Bethany's ex-boyfriend Scott Thomas's car abandoned in a rural part of Tucson, Louisiana. The vehicle had women's clothing and blood in it.
When the authorities did find the car, they did see some footprints. They kind of followed where that went. However, The footsteps did not lead them in any path to locate Bethany or Scott or have any clues as to where they ended up.
While authorities intensify their manhunt, investigators try to determine what may have sparked this violent abduction. As detectives speak to Bethany's family, they uncover a troubling truth.
Bethany was in a relationship with Scott, and it was a violent relationship.
To friends, co-workers, and the larger Lafayette community, this revelation comes as a shock.
From the outside looking in, they looked like friends, ex-boyfriend and girlfriend, but friends who cared about the well-being of the child they had together.
Bethany's cousin Marcus tells detectives he was afraid for her safety.
Marcus says that he actually moved in with Bethany because she had received threats from Thomas in the past. So obviously there was some tension there.
Like his mood swings would be like quick, fast, in a hurry.
It seems like he wasn't a bad guy. I don't think that anyone thought that he would take it to the extremes that he did.
Bethany's brother Victor also describes Scott's jealous tendencies to detectives.
Like, that's just how he was. Like, he was so, like, he was just insecure, I guess. Like, you know, like, it's just crazy.
Just calm down.
You think I'm stupid?
God, what are you talking about?
As soon as I leave, you can go to somebody else.
That doesn't even make sense, Scott. You know what? I can't even talk about this.
Nah, you ain't going nowhere.
Scott!
He's becoming more possessive. He was monitoring her every move, and when she wasn't there or where she would normally be, he would be there. He's definitely out to cause her harm.
Said you ain't going nowhere. You hear me?
He was very abusive and, struck her, threatened to kill her and her child, drug her by her hair. He was, known to have a pattern of violence.
And how long did this go on?
For more than 2 years, family members say Bethany kept the abuse a secret. But eventually, they began to suspect something was very wrong.
She wouldn't go out, ever. She wouldn't do things she used to do. But I started catching on to it after I started hearing a little bit of things,
There's a lot of shame and embarrassment for victims of domestic violence. A lot of times the victim of the abuse is being told that it's their fault they're being abused, and they start to believe it. It's a very shameful feeling for them, and it's not uncommon for them to keep it from their loved ones.
There was a lot of abuse, and she would leave, come back, leave, and come back. And she finally had enough in June, and she reported him to authorities because he threatened to kill her.
Fearing for her safety and that of their young child, Bethany moved out of the Leonville house and filed a restraining order against Scott.
She told me, I'm really scared because he really is crazy.
Bethany moved in with her mother, but she had to return to Scott's house to retrieve some things. When she did, Scott made a scene. Law enforcement was called and Scott was arrested.
He was like, Bethany, I'm gonna get you here. I'm gonna get you here.
After his arrest, Scott was apologetic, and he made it clear to Bethany that he intended to change his life for the better, and he hoped that Bethany would allow him back in her life.
We know that she was in a relationship that had involved domestic violence. She made a report to authorities. However, the person that she made the report against was the father of her child. She would leave, come back, leave, and come back, and she finally had enough.
According to Bethany's brother, Victor, that was a bitter pill for Scott to swallow.
He wouldn't tell me exactly, I'm a kill myself, but he would always I can't live like this. He just had in his mind, like if he couldn't be with Bethany, nobody could be with Bethany.
For detectives, it's now clear Scott Thomas is their man. But if Bethany is Scott's captive, they know there may not be much time to save her.
No one even knows if Bethany is still alive. This guy sounds suicidal, and it's quite possible he's planning to kill Bethany and himself.
Several hours into the search, when it seems the stakes couldn't get any higher, Bethany's sister receives an unexpected call.
Hello? Oh my God, Bethany.
Listen, I need you to take care of my son. Please tell me that you'll take care of my son.
What? Where are you? Where are you?
Just promise
Bethany, where are you? Bethany!
While it's reassuring to know Bethany is still alive, the sense of relief is fleeting.
The sister doesn't know where her sister's calling from, what's going on, but those words, take care of my son, kind of implies like, hey, this is it. It's your responsibility because I'm not going to be here anymore.
But as one family's worst nightmare continues to unfold, another equally shocking development takes the case in an even more unbelievable direction.
One of the younger cousins went to see the psychic.
She said, don't go too far. Bethany is still in the area.
For nearly 24 hours, Bethany Arsenault has been missing in southern Louisiana. A surprise phone call has just revealed that Bethany is still alive, but for how long, no one knows.
Bethany was with Scott, and it was a violent relationship. He threatened to kill her, and based on his actions, he definitely intended to do so.
Ain't going nowhere, you hear me?
Desperate to find Bethany before it's too late, her family and friends step up their already intensive search.
They rallied together, and maybe 100 of them were out there searching, on foot, on four-wheelers, combing almost the entire city, almost the entire Lafayette Parish.
The tension was very thick. They were just so upset by her disappearance.
By the morning of November 8th, exhausted friends, family, and authorities are beginning to wonder if Scott Thomas hasn't already fled Lafayette Parish, having either dragged Bethany with him or left her for dead in the Louisiana Bayou.
Authorities, once they found the footsteps, they used multiple things. They used drones, they used cadaver dogs, and they were not able to find any lead.
But just as their hopes are fading, Bethany's family receives a tip from a most unusual source.
One of the younger cousins went to see the psychic, and the reading said that she was in the general area where the car was.
The woman told them to look by a body of water.
Heeding the psychic's advice, Bethany's family, including Victor and Marcus Arsenault, hightail it back towards the location where Scott's car was found 2 days before. There, they encounter a local resident named Kenneth Alleman.
Howdy. What can I do for you, sir?
Hey, we're looking for my niece, and we spoke to a psychic, and she said that she was not too far from where her car is, just like right up the way. Said something else about a body of water.
They said one of her family members believes in psychics real good, and she told him that she was still alive and she was near a body of water. And when he said body of water, the first thing that came into my mind, they have a pond which was about maybe 400 yards from there, which we called Anderson Pond. So we figured that would be the next place that we needed to go.
It's a little ways that way. I can show you if you'd like.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
All right, well, let's go.
But on their way to the pond, the men run into a local farmer.
Where y'all headed? Anderson Pond. We're looking for that missing girl.
Ow! You guys checked all around these abandoned houses and everything?
They said, yes, we searched all the abandoned houses on this road, but we didn't find nothing. And that's when he pointed to the house in the middle of the field and asked them if they had searched there. And they said, no. They said, we didn't even know there was a house there.
At first glance, you'd never think that there was a home there. It looks like a bunch of trees, bushes, overgrown grass.
I guess we'll check that first.
It was kind of a weird feeling, almost like something you only see in the movies. We got there and everybody just kind of stopped and looked at each other and like, what are we supposed to do now? What happens now?
Hey, check out the back.
He was going towards the back of the house, and then that's when she started screaming.
Hang up right here, okay?
Hearing Bethany's cries for help, her cousin Marcus takes action.
Marcus breaks it open, and at that point, he could hear Bethany scream.
Bethany! Bethany, is he on? Where are you? Bethany!
He had a knife to her throat, and he started, stabbing her, in essence, in the throat and in the head.
Scott, stop! Scott, stop!
And at that point, he opened fire.
Marcus!
When she started screaming, everything happened so fast, and everything, the gunfire and everything, everybody scattering at the same time, everybody hollering for the police. None of us knew what was going on. Nobody knew what was going on inside that house.
In the morning hours of November 8th, 2013, the search for 29-year-old single mother Bethany Arsenault has come to a head as a hail of gunfire erupts from inside an abandoned farmhouse just outside her hometown of Tucson, Louisiana.
When we heard the shots, we didn't know where the shooting was coming from. We just know that one of the guys ran towards the back of the house. So we didn't know if there was gunfire between the two or if it was just one single gun. We didn't know what was going on.
Though it seems like an eternity, seconds after the shooting stops, a figure emerges from the home.
I noticed her cousin come around the corner with her, and everybody just, once we saw that, we just all kind of took a deep breath in. It was bloody. I mean, she had blood coming from her head and her neck and everything. We saw the knife wounds to her neck. We saw the knife wounds in her head. And we knew she needed to get to the hospital quick.
But as serious as Bethany's wounds appear, when first responders arrive, they quickly ascertain that her injuries are not life-threatening. And fortunately, she's going to survive.
Everyone is clapping, they're cheering, they're hugging each other. So it was a moment of triumph.
With Bethany now en route to a hospital, a team of officers cautiously enters the abandoned farmhouse.
Clear right.
Officers don't know if Scott Thomas is truly dead or if he's still alive, armed, and dangerous.
Moments later, they find his lifeless body in a bedroom.
Body left. Angle 7, starting major crimes in the detective police.
The scene is nothing short of pure carnage.
There's blood everywhere. There are bullet casings everywhere. It looks like the shootout at the OK Corral.
No pulse.
Bethany's cousin, Marcus Arsenault, had in fact shot Scott Thomas 11 times.
When Marcus eventually sits down with detectives, he describes why Scott had left him little choice.
They kicked down the door, went into the bedroom, and there Scott was on top of Bethany, stabbing her.
They tussling, which somehow, she's like, he stabbed me, Mark, he killing me, help me, he stabbed me in my head, he stabbed me.
When the first shot hit him, he kept stabbing her.
I shot him in the leg, I shot, and I hit him in the ribs. I hit him in the ribs, that's when he dropped the knife.
He had to strike him 11 times before Bethany was able to free herself from his grip. That's how strong and possessive he was. He was being shot numerous times, but he was intent on causing her physical harm and killing her.
But just how lucky Bethany is to be alive doesn't become clear until 11 days later when she's able to speak with detectives. According to Bethany, it all began on the afternoon of November 6th, 2013.
So although she had a restraining order against him, she did have shared custody. This was a prearranged meeting, and as they would do whenever it was her time to pick up her son, they would meet in a neutral location.
Apparently, as this exchange is occurring, he made some sort of advance towards Bethany.
He was trying to talk to me and trying to hug me, and I was like, no, Scott, I'm leaving. He just went crazy. And I know how Scott do, and he was mad or whatever. So I seen him in my rear view. He was speeding, like following me, chasing me. So I went to the closest place I knew, and that was daycare.
So Scott chases Bethany to the daycare. He's yelling, he's screaming, and he throws Bethany in the car just after a Good Samaritan is able to grab her son and takes off.
Scott was able to snatch Bethany and throw her into his vehicle and drive off, holding onto his steering wheel and then grabbing Bethany's hair so she could not break free.
He was just mad. You see what you made me do? You see what you made me do?
Bethany says Scott then marched her through the adjacent sugarcane fields.
They hid out in the ditch while the family, our police officers, roamed right up and down the street, feet away from them. Of course, he threatened to kill her if she was to make a sound.
He basically drug her through the woods that first night of the kidnapping, and then eventually he drug her to this house.
Bethany's time in that home was like a living hell. It was worse than prison. He watched her every move.
There was a lone mattress in the corner of a room, very little sunlight, and I believe a jug of water may have been left behind for some years, I'm sure.
The first night she was forced to sleep on the floor under a dirty carpet while he had a knife to her throat.
I couldn't move, I couldn't do nothing because he would threaten to kill me and he kept saying he had a gun. He had a gun. And when we'd sleep, he would sleep with a knife around my throat.
I know that he kept her for those 2 days without any food or water. You know, torture.
But Bethany says that even in her weakened state, she continued to fight for her life.
The first day there, she was trying to go into the restroom and she was like, you know what, I'm not gonna let this guy just, hold me here. So she got a curtain rod and tried to hit him upside the head. And, it just bounced off. Her second day, she was using the restroom and she took a piece of wood and tried to break free by knocking out the window, but we caught her.
To make matters worse, Bethany says that with each passing hour, Scott was growing more and more unstable.
He would cry and say he should have just loved me. Why he just didn't love me. He would get angry. He would get mad. He kept saying he was going to kill me and then he was going to kill himself.
His emotions and mood varied. And even at one point, Bethany said he became paranoid. And she said that she sensed that he kind of regretted that it got that far, but it was too late for him to turn back. Throughout the whole ordeal, he made it known that his main intention was to kill her, but they were going to die together.
Then, on the morning of November 8th, a glimmer of hope appeared.
They woke up, they both heard the ATVs, and he was like, oh, it's your family, they're coming for you. And he put her on the bed and he held a knife to her as the family neared. And then he said, we're about to die.
Bethany knows this might be her last chance to survive this ordeal, and she just starts screaming.
All I felt was him trying to slice my neck. So I kept hollering, help, help. He killing me, help, help.
Moments later, it was all over.
So Marcus kept saying, let her go, Scott, let her go. And he kept trying to slice my neck. And I kept hollering, no, Marcus, help me. He trying to kill me. He trying to kill me. Please help me. And Scott didn't say nothing. Lamar fired the gun.
Everything had to have fallen into place for this story to end how it did. The fact that from the moment this happened, the family and the community came together and they fought to get her back. She came out bloodied, she came out scarred, but she came out of it.
Following Bethany's statement, on April 23, 2014, a Louisiana grand jury formally clears her cousin Marcus of any wrongdoing in the shooting death of Scott Thomas.
Everyone thought that Marcus did the right thing. Law enforcement did end up saying that it was a justifiable homicide. And I believe had they not, it would have been public outrage.
And though Bethany and her family are still reeling from the terrible aftermath of her violent abduction, everyone knows the final outcome could have been far, far worse.
It was just courageous and brave effort by the entire family.
I believe that everyone thought that Marcus did the right thing. The fact that she made it out of this and, was saved by her family, reunited with her son, it's just the ultimate story of survival.
Scott was hoping that he would die with Bethany. Throughout the whole ordeal, he made it known that his main intention was they were going to die together. It definitely was a case of, if I can't have you, no one will.
It wasn't exactly a sigh of relief. They were ecstatic to have Bethany out of harm's way, but they were also apologetic for the Thomas family.
This woman, although what she had to go through was gruesome, got out alive. And that isn't an officer carrying her. And that says a lot. The officers were there, but in that image, that's a community and that's a family literally holding each other up.
What if the respected local politician handing out high school diplomas, leading civic parades, and smiling warmly from suburban campaign posters was actually an elusive monster who left a trail of terror across the freezing streets of the Windy City nearly half a century ago? It was a bone-chilling November night in 1979 when the frost-covered streets of Chicago's North Side became the backdrop for a horrific nightmare that would paralyze the metropolitan area for decades. Laura Vance, a brilliant 21-year-old architectural student whose boundless talent and radiant presence made her a beloved figure at Northwestern University, vanished without a trace while walking back to her apartment near Lincoln Park. She had stepped out at precisely 9:30 p.m. to mail a letter at a nearby corner mailbox. She never returned. Her front door was found unlocked, a record was still spinning on her turntable, and her cat sat waiting on the windowsill beside a lukewarm cup of tea. There were no signs of a struggle, no shattered glass, no bloodstains on the sidewalk, and not a single witness who saw her disappear into the swirling Midwestern fog. The next morning, headlines shattered the morning calm across the region. Northwestern student vanishes, Lincoln Park abduction shock, police sweep lakefront for missing co-ed. Within 48 hours, Chicago Police Department detectives were forced to confront a terrifying reality. Laura had not run away. She had been silently snatched by an invisible predator who navigated the urban jungle without leaving a single fingerprint, a single shoe impression, or a drop of blood. Lead Detective Frank Callahan, a seasoned homicide investigator known for his iron grit and obsession with detail, took charge of the investigation under immense pressure from City Hall. His flashlights cut through the eerie gloom of abandoned industrial warehouses along the Chicago River, illuminating damp concrete floors, rusting machinery, and dark alleys where street rumors suggested illicit gatherings occurred late at night. Laura was a young woman of absolute routine, a dedicated scholar who called her family in Naperville every evening at 8 p.m. without fail, making her sudden, complete erasure a horrific event that sent shockwaves through the academic community. Her apartment yielded no immediate physical clues, yet crime scene technicians noted one baffling detail: a single, discarded cigarette filter found resting in the snow 3 yards from her front gate, smoked down to the base and bearing a tiny, microscopic trace of bodily fluid that the primitive forensic technology of 1979 was entirely incapable of analyzing. Was this the discarded residue of a meticulous stalker who had studied her daily routine down to the second, or had Laura crossed paths with an opportunistic killer lurking in the shadows of the elevated train tracks? The tight-knit neighborhood retreated behind locked doors. Local businesses posted missing flyers in every window, and law enforcement deployed dive teams, K-9 units, and mounted patrols to scour every foot of the Lake Michigan shoreline and the desolate industrial corridors of the South Side. As the harsh winter winds swept across Lake Michigan, the initial flurry of leads ground to a devastating halt against a wall of thick, impenetrable silence that grew colder with every passing frost. Detective Callahan and his task force interrogated over 400 potential suspects, ranging from eccentric campus workers and former acquaintances to local delivery drivers and commuters who frequented the Fullerton station. Every promising lead dissolved into a frustrating maze of dead ends, unverified sightings, and rock-solid alibis. The forensic laboratory returned empty results. The fingerprint index yielded 0 matches, and Laura's bank accounts remained completely untouched. It was as if her abductor possessed an expert understanding of police tactics, knowing exactly how to execute a brazen kidnapping in a densely populated urban area without dropping a thread of clothing fiber, leaving a tire track in the snow, or allowing a single muffled scream to alert the neighbors. Sensational headlines in the Chicago Tribune and Sun-Times grew increasingly grim. Lincoln Park Phantom Evades Task Force, the cold case that haunts Chicago, shadows over Northwestern. The city's collective sense of security curdled into icy paranoia as citizens realized a calculating predator was walking freely among them, lost in the anonymous crowds commuting through the Loop every morning. Public anxiety flared into outrage when regional tabloids leaked rumors that a serial predator might be operating along the Interstate 94 corridor, targeting young women who lived in ground-floor apartments near transit hubs. Yet, without a physical body, a secondary crime scene, or a shred of physical evidence linking any suspect to the crime, prosecutors refused to issue search warrants or authorize wiretaps on the suspicious figures brought into the Area 3 Detective Headquarters for questioning. Detective Callahan watched helplessly as the investigation's momentum evaporated under a mountain of administrative paperwork, dead-end hotline calls, and bureaucratic friction. The initial public shock gradually calcified into a heavy, lingering dread that hung over the precinct like an inescapable winter smog. By the winter of 1982, 3 years after Laura vanished into the foggy Chicago night, the dedicated task force was officially dismantled, its personnel reassigned to fresh, violent homicides demanding immediate attention on the city streets. The case file, once a thick stack of daily field reports and lab requisitions, was bound in cardboard binders and transferred to the dusty metal shelves of the cold case archive in the basement of 26th and California. Detective Callahan eventually retired, his hair turned white, his desk cleared out, leaving behind notebooks overflowing with unsolved timelines, hand-drawn maps, and haunting unanswered questions that refused to let him rest. The missing posters along Clark Street yellowed, tore, and were eventually painted over by city maintenance crews, leaving behind a community permanently scarred by an open wound that refused to heal. Nearly 5 decades passed, transforming Chicago into a modern metropolis dominated by fiber-optic networks, digital surveillance, and revolutionary genetic forensic tools that investigators in 1979 could scarcely have imagined. The historic brick walk-ups of Lincoln Park remained standing, their iron fire escapes holding secrets that time seemed to have sealed away forever. In early 2026, a specialized cold case team equipped with advanced touch DNA extraction technology and genealogical database access reopened the Laura Vance file, determined to perform a comprehensive forensic audit of every physical artifact preserved in the evidence locker. Forensic specialists focused their cutting-edge equipment on the single physical item retrieved from the snow-covered sidewalk in 1979, the discarded cigarette filter recovered near Laura's front gate, which had sat preserved inside a climate-controlled glass vial for 47 years. Utilizing ultra-sensitive vacuum swabbing techniques capable of isolating microscopic skin cells embedded deep within degraded paper fibers, technicians successfully extracted a full, pristine male DNA profile. When the profile was run through national criminal databases, it produced 0 direct hits, but genetic genealogists quickly uploaded the raw data to public genealogy databases, constructing a massive, multi-generational family tree that pointed toward a prominent family line residing in suburban Cook County. The genealogical net narrowed the pool of potential suspects down to 3 brothers who had resided in the Chicago area during the late 1970s. Cold case detectives launched a covert, high-surveillance operation, shadowing the men through their suburban neighborhoods to obtain abandoned reference samples of their DNA without sparking alarm or alerting legal counsel. When undercover officers observed the eldest brother, a respected 72-year-old suburban mayor named Arthur Pendleton, who is currently serving his 4th term in office, finish a drive-through coffee at a local bank and toss a discarded paper cup into a commercial dumpster, an officer moved in immediately to secure the item under strict chain of custody protocols. The crime lab executed an expedited comparative analysis, and within 12 hours, the verdict was absolute. The DNA from the discarded coffee cup matched the genetic material extracted from the 1979 cigarette filter with overwhelming mathematical certainty. The name attached to the genetic match sent a shockwave of profound horror through the law enforcement establishment, completely shattering the foundational assumptions of the original investigation. Arthur Pendleton was not a shadowy street drifter or a known criminal. He was a celebrated public servant, a pillar of the community who had spent decades organizing local charity drives, sitting on regional planning commissions, and championing law enforcement initiatives. He had lived a life of flawless suburban respectability, posing for photographs with state officials and speaking at high school graduations, all while hiding a monstrous, sickening secret beneath his tailored suits and friendly smile. On a chilly morning in mid-2026, a heavily armed tactical unit surrounded Pendleton's manicured suburban estate, breaching the front doors and placing the aging politician in heavy steel handcuffs as local news crews rushed to the scene. Breaking news broadcasts exploded across international networks with sensational intensity. Chicago 1979 cold case solved. Genealogy database exposes suburban mayor. The arrest shattered the region's long-standing perceptions, exposing a terrifying reality that had remained buried beneath a facade of suburban civic pride for nearly 50 years. Under intense interrogation by cold case detectives, confronted with irrefutable genetic proof and historical spatial tracking data, Pendleton's polished, grandfatherly composure completely disintegrated. His breakdown led detectives to the discovery of human remains hidden deep within a sealed concrete wall of a rural storage facility he had purchased under a shell company in 1980. The haunting mystery that had frozen Lincoln Park in fear for nearly half a century was finally stripped of its darkness under the unyielding beam of modern science, leaving behind an indelible mark on the region's history and a chilling reminder that the most terrifying predators are often the ones who hide in plain sight behind a bright smile and a public title. The formal indictment of Arthur Pendleton inside the Cook County Criminal Courts building ignited a media circus and legal battle that gripped the entire nation. For 47 years, the disappearance of Laura Vance had been viewed as an unsolvable urban legend, a tragedy discussed in whispers among older residents who remembered the terrifying autumn of 1979. Now, the public confronted the incomprehensible reality that the killer was a man who had built a career on trust, authority, and public service, shaking hands with voters while the remains of his victim lay entombed in a dark concrete chamber miles away. Prosecutors assembled a massive array of historical records, land deeds, and forensic reconstructions to ensure the charges of capital murder and kidnapping would stand up against any legal challenge. Inside the interrogation rooms at Area 3 headquarters, detectives painstakingly pieced together Pendleton's movements on November 12, 1979. They discovered that Pendleton, then a 25-year-old commercial real estate salesman, had utilized his access to vacant properties and master keys to stalk young women in Lincoln Park. On the night Laura vanished, Pendleton had parked his vehicle in an alleyway, waiting in the shadows near the corner mailbox. When Laura stepped out into the cold night air, Pendleton forced her at gunpoint into a vacant apartment building he was listing, subduing her before transporting her to a rural property outside the city limits. The calculated coldness of his actions shocked even veteran homicide detectives. Pendleton had systematically studied police scanner frequencies, mapped out local patrol routes, and used commercial solvents to strip physical evidence from his vehicle. In the weeks following the crime, while Detective Callahan's team searched industrial lots and dragged the river, Pendleton had calmly returned to his real estate office, attending civic luncheons, and eventually launching his long, successful political career. He had seamlessly integrated himself into the fabric of suburban leadership, using his charm and influence to project an image of absolute moral rectitude. The recovery of Laura's remains inside the rural storage facility provided a profound, emotional resolution for her surviving family members and the entire Chicago community. Forensic anthropologists worked around the clock to carefully unseal the concrete wall, recovering her personal effects, including a silver pendant her parents had given her for her 21st birthday. The pendant remained untarnished, a silent, enduring witness to the tragedy that had stolen her young life on that icy November night in 1979. As the judicial proceedings advanced toward a trial, Pendleton's high-priced legal team attempted to file aggressive motions to suppress the DNA evidence retrieved from the commercial dumpster, arguing that searching discarded trash constituted an unconstitutional violation of his privacy rights. However, the presiding judge issued a definitive, sweeping rejection of the motion, ruling that abandoned trash in a public receptacle carries no legal expectation of privacy, particularly when weighed against the overwhelming public interest in solving a brutal capital murder. Deprived of his primary legal defense, Pendleton's options vanished. On a gray, rain-swept afternoon in late 2026, Arthur Pendleton stood before a packed courtroom in heavy wrist restraints, his head bowed, as the judge sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Laura's younger sister stood at the victim impact podium, her voice trembling with a powerful mix of grief and moral strength as she addressed the disgraced former mayor directly. "You hid behind your title, your money, and your political friends for nearly 50 years, she said, her words echoing through the silent courtroom. You thought you were smarter than the law, smarter than the truth. But you couldn't outrun time, and you couldn't outrun her name. Laura is finally free, and you will die alone in the dark. Outside the courthouse on 26th Street, as a cold Midwestern rain fell over the city, hundreds of people gathered to light candles and leave white roses beside a large photograph of Laura Vance placed on the steps. The long, terrifying ordeal that had haunted Lincoln Park since 1979 was officially over. The phantom had been unmasked, the mystery solved, and the dark secret that had hung over the Windy City was forever dispelled by the relentless march of justice. The conviction of Arthur Pendleton did not merely close a single cold case file. It sent shockwaves through law enforcement agencies across the country, proving that genetic genealogy and abandoned touch DNA could dismantle even the most elaborate, decades-old cover-ups. The Illinois State Police immediately established a dedicated cold case task force, securing state funding to re-examine over 1,500 unsolved disappearances and homicides dating back to the 1960s. The success of the Vance investigation proved that no amount of time, political power, or civic influence could permanently shield a killer from the reach of modern science. In Lincoln Park, the neighborhood where Laura had lived and studied began a quiet, deep process of healing. For nearly 5 decades, older residents had lived with the terrifying belief that an anonymous monster had snatched a young woman from their street and vanished into thin air. Learning that the perpetrator was a respected suburban politician who had frequented city events was an unsettling revelation, yet it permanently removed the lingering dread of an unknown phantom walking the neighborhood alleys. In early 2027, the city of Chicago officially dedicated a quiet, sunlit park near the Northwestern University campus as the Laura Vance Memorial Garden. Designed by local landscape architects, the park featured native wildflowers, stone benches, and a bronze sculpture of an open sketchbook whose pages appeared to transform into birds taking flight. At the base of the sculpture, an inscription carved into granite read, "Truth is stronger than time. Light endures forever." On the day the Memorial Garden was open to the public, hundreds of students, community members, and retired police officers gathered under a clear blue sky, holding white roses while a student string quartet played softly in the background. The suffocating fear that had gripped the neighborhood in November 1979 was replaced by a deep sense of unity, reverence, and peace. The community had reclaimed its history, transforming a place of memory into a permanent sanctuary of hope and truth. As dusk settled over Chicago, casting a warm golden glow across the skyline and the calm waters of Lake Michigan, the street lamps along Clark Street flickered to life, illuminating the peaceful paths of the Memorial Garden. The cold case that had haunted the city for 47 years was finally at rest, its secrets exposed, its victim honored, and its perpetrator locked away forever. The shadows of the past had dissolved at last, leaving behind an eternal reminder that justice may be delayed, but it will always break through the dark. The ripple effect of the Pendleton conviction extended far beyond Illinois, inspiring law enforcement agencies across the Midwest to review legacy evidence lockers for untested biological material. Homicide units from Detroit to Minneapolis began retrieving forgotten cardboard boxes containing preserved clothing, cigarette butts, and latent swabs from cold cases long thought to be hopeless. The resolution of Laura Vance's case proved that microscopic traces of biological material, preserved in paper envelopes for decades, held the power to shatter the most ironclad facades and bring truth to families who had spent lifetimes searching in the dark. In Chicago, retired Detective Frank Callahan, now 91 years old, sat in the front row during the dedication of the Laura Vance Memorial Garden. The worn leather notebook he had carried throughout the late 1970s, filled with hand-drawn maps and dead-end leads, was officially donated to the Chicago Police Department Museum, stamped with bold red letters across its cover, "Solved." For Callahan, seeing the young students gather under the open sky in Lincoln Park was the ultimate fulfillment of a lifetime of service, a quiet, powerful confirmation that no effort spent pursuing the truth is ever in vain. The historic brownstones of Lincoln Park, The tree-lined avenues and the bustling campus streets no longer held terrifying secrets. The city had dragged its dark history into the light, setting new legal and forensic precedents that protected the innocent and empowered investigators to pursue justice across generations. The legacy of Laura Vance became a beacon of hope for thousands of families across the nation who were still waiting for answers, proving that time is no longer an ally to those who commit atrocities in the shadows. As midnight approached over the Windy City, the beam from the Willis Tower swept across the urban landscape, casting its brilliant light over the quiet streets of Lincoln Park, the sprawling university campus, and the peaceful gardens of the Memorial Park. The city was safe, the mystery solved, and the memory of a brilliant young student was restored to the light, where it would shine bright and unbroken for all time. The formal sentencing of Arthur Pendleton was intended to signal the absolute end of the legal proceedings surrounding Laura Vance. The public had watched the total collapse of a respected political figure, marveled at the revolutionary power of genetic genealogy, and witnessed the recovery of remains that had sat hidden in a rural storage locker for nearly half a century. Yet, as court officers led the disgraced former mayor away to a state penitentiary, cold case detectives sitting in the quiet basement of Area 3 headquarters were reviewing a single physical item that refused to align with the official narrative of the crime. On an examination table lay a vintage silver wristwatch with a cracked glass face, a piece of jewelry recovered from the concrete chamber alongside Laura's remains. Crime lab reports confirmed the watch had stopped at 10:14 p.m. on November 12, 1979, presumably from the force of a violent impact. However, when investigators reviewed macro photographs taken during the original 1979 processing of Laura's apartment, they noticed a detail that had been overlooked under the dim lighting of the entry hall. In a photograph depicting Laura's entryway table, taken on the morning after she disappeared, a distinct circular dust impression near her key tray showed where a round object had sat for days before being suddenly removed. Lying beside the impression was a parking validation stub from an underground garage beneath the Daily Center in downtown Chicago, stamped with an entry time of 11:45 p.m. on November 12, 1979. The timeline was dangerously contradictory. If Laura had been abducted at 9:30 p.m. near Lincoln Park and killed by Arthur Pendleton shortly after 10 p.m., how could a parking stub from a municipal garage downtown be stamped at 11:45 p.m. that same night? And why was there a clean impression in the dust on her table, suggesting her wristwatch had been sitting in her hallway after police had already secured the apartment on the morning of November 13th? The realization sent a wave of dread through the cold case team. The confession provided by Pendleton, which had aligned so well with the DNA match and the storage locker discovery, was incomplete. Pendleton had taken sole responsibility for the murder to protect a secondary aspect of the crime, a detail so sensitive, so deeply connected to local political power, that even a life sentence in prison was preferable to exposing it. Detectives subpoenaed archived digital security logs and microfilm records from the Daily Center garage from the night of November 12, 1979. The records had been transferred to optical storage during a county modernization drive and sat uncatalogued in a municipal storage facility in Cicero. For days, analysts scrubbed through thousands of pages of grainy entry logs and security register prints. At 11:42 p.m. on November 12, 1979, an official county vehicle entered the basement level of the Daily Center garage, far away from public parking bays. The driver did not exit through the elevator banks. Instead, the driver used a master key card to access a restricted utility corridor marked municipal maintenance only. Minutes later, a second individual emerged from the corridor carrying a dark leather briefcase, walking quickly toward the street exit leading out onto Washington Street. When investigators cross-referenced the key card records with county payroll files from 1979, the name attached to the access card stunned the team. The card belonged to former Chief Judge Raymond Vance, no relation to the victim, a legendary political boss who had controlled judicial appointments and municipal contracts across Cook County for 3 decades before his death in 1998. The investigation had breached a terrifying new threshold. The killer had not acted in total isolation. He had utilized a high-level political liaison who had physically entered the crime scene after the initial police walkthrough, planting evidence and altering the physical state of Laura's apartment to ensure police attention remained focused on a simple street abduction. Detectives did not log the discovery into standard departmental databases. Knowing that the legacy of the old political machine still held deep ties across local government, they contacted the Illinois Attorney General's office, requesting an emergency, off-the-record briefing with senior prosecutors. The meeting took place inside a secure conference room in Springfield. When detectives presented the garage records, the dust impression analysis, and the utility access logs from November 1979, prosecutors realized the full scope of the cover-up. The maintenance corridor beneath the Daly Center did not lead merely to utility pipes. It was a key access point for a series of decommissioned underground freight tunnels built beneath the loop in the early 20th century, tunnels running continuously beneath the city core. The pieces of a far larger puzzle locked into place. Laura Vance had not been targeted solely because of Pendleton's predatory motives. During her final semester as an architectural student, Laura had been hired by a municipal planning firm to digitize historic blueprints for an upcoming downtown transit expansion. While processing architectural scans of the subsurface utility grid beneath the loop, she had accidentally discovered an unmapped, private structural modification, a series of reinforced, climate-controlled storage vaults excavated directly beneath county property, drawing unmetered power from the city grid. These hidden subterranean chambers were being used by a corrupt network of public officials, judges, and developers to store untraceable cash, political extortion files, and unrecorded financial records dating back to the late 1950s. When Laura realized the structural anomalies she was mapping were active, high-security installations, she had saved the raw architectural files onto a magnetic tape drive, the very tape drive that Judge Raymond Vance had retrieved from her apartment on the night of November 12, 1979, while her family was at the precinct filing the missing persons report. Armed with this terrifying revelation, state authorities launched a secret, militarized probe under total operational security, codenamed Operation Iron Grid. Using specialized ground-penetrating radar concealed inside utility vans, investigators scanned the subterranean corridor beneath Washington Street, pinpointing two massive, void-like structures buried 30 feet beneath the intersection of Clark and Washington, less than 2 blocks from City Hall. On a cold night in late 2026, an elite tactical team from the Illinois State Police, accompanied by federal cyberforensic specialists, executed a covert breach of the utility portal beneath the Daly Center. Equipped with night vision gear and heavy thermal cutters, the team moved silently through the damp brick arches of the abandoned freight tunnel network until they reached a heavy steel bulkhead door recessed into the concrete rock. When engineers cut through the locking mechanism and breached the door, they stepped into a climate-controlled facility that resembled a private bank vault. Lining the reinforced walls were rows of metallic storage lockers, high-capacity server arrays, and climate-sealed display cases containing stolen artworks, unrecorded currency, and thousands of archived paper dossiers marked with the crests of various municipal agencies. Inside Vault 03, investigators recovered the ultimate smoking gun, Laura Vance's original missing tape drive, sitting inside a sealed plastic pouch alongside handwritten operational notes from 1979. The notes detailed every phase of the operation, confirming that Pendleton had been paid a massive sum by political insiders to ensure that the existence of the subterranean vault grid remained hidden at all costs. When Pendleton's abduction of Laura created an immediate police crisis, political fixers used the chaos to execute a complete wipe of her digital records, ensuring her architectural discoveries were erased before technicians could examine her research. The discovery of the subterranean vault beneath the loop sent shockwaves through the highest levels of Illinois government, shattering public confidence in municipal institutions and triggering a massive federal probe into historic political corruption. Front-page headlines across the nation captured the cinematic scale of the revelation. Chicago cold case unearths shadow grid. Secret subterranean vault reveals historic political cover-up behind 1979 murder. Federal prosecutors issued indictments against 5 surviving former officials, developers, and retired administrators linked to the vault's construction, freezing their assets and revoking their pensions under federal racketeering statutes. The total exposure of the subterranean network brought the ultimate truth of Laura Vance's death into the light, transforming her memory from that of a helpless victim into that of an unsung hero whose professional integrity had ultimately exposed a shadow system that had compromised the city for generations. In early 2027, the city of Chicago permanently backfilled the access portals leading to the subterranean vaults, filling the chambers with solid concrete slurry to ensure those dark spaces could never be used again. Above ground, at the corner of Clark and Washington Streets, a permanent bronze memorial plaque was dedicated in Laura's honor, depicting a young woman holding an architectural blueprint while looking toward the skyline, a symbol of courage, truth, and the enduring power of light over the deepest shadows of the earth. Detectives and family members stood together at the edge of the dedication ceremony, watching as flowers were placed at the base of the monument. The long, terrifying road that had begun on an icy night in Lincoln Park nearly half a century earlier had finally reached its absolute end. The mystery was solved, the cover-up destroyed, the shadow grid erased, and the name of Laura Vance was forever restored to the light of justice. The concrete ceiling of the subterranean vaults beneath the loop was meant to serve as the absolute physical conclusion to the shadow network that had claimed Laura Vance's life. The heavy bulkhead doors were encased in solid concrete, the surviving fixers were placed under federal indictment, and state authorities launched a sweeping legislative ethics review. Yet, as digital forensic specialists at the Illinois State Police Cyber Command Unit began deep-level data reconstruction on the server arrays seized during Operation Iron Grid, they uncovered an automated, secondary data transmission protocol embedded within the vault's processing architecture, a protocol designed to activate automatically if the primary vault power was severed. Lead investigators received an urgent briefing at the State Police Command Center. On high-definition monitors, analysts displayed a live tracking map of encrypted data bursts bouncing between secondary cloud servers in Switzerland, Liechtenstein, and the Cayman Islands. The subterranean vault beneath the Daily Center had not operated as an isolated storage site. It was the primary central node for an automated, multi-jurisdictional blackmail and financial archiving network codenamed Lakeshore 9. The Lakeshore 9 system was programmed with an uncompromising automated dead man switch. Every 72 hours, the server array required a manual administrative override key, a key held exclusively by the syndicate's master financial manager, an 84-year-old former investment banker named Harrison Vance Sterling, a distant relative of the late Judge Raymond Vance. Harrison had lived in luxurious isolation on a private estate in the North Woods of Wisconsin since 2005, operating as the silent custodian of the network's offshore accounts and digital failsafes. If the master override key was not entered into the system before the automated countdown clock reached 0, the Lakeshore 9 protocol was programmed to execute an unencrypted public release of over 50 terabytes of wiretap recordings, compromised land deeds, and covert surveillance logs to open-access public servers worldwide. The potential fallout threatened to destabilize local municipal governance, financial markets, and active law enforcement operations across multiple states. Realizing the catastrophic stakes, a joint federal-state tactical strike team mounted an immediate, high-risk airborne operation into the Wisconsin wilderness under cover of a heavy northern blizzard. Flying beneath local radar coverage in specialized transport helicopters, the team executed a midnight assault on Harrison's fortified estate, breaching the outer perimeter walls and securing the main residence within minutes. Inside the estate's subterranean bunker, tactical operators secured Harrison at his primary workstation, where the Lakeshore 9 countdown clock displayed less than 2 hours remaining before the global automated release executed. Sitting in a leather chair surrounded by armed officers, the elderly banker remained cold and detached, offering a faint, arrogant smile. He informed investigators that the override key was protected by a dynamic biometric token, a token he claimed to have destroyed minutes before the team breached the perimeter. He demanded absolute immunity, the immediate unfreezing of his offshore accounts, and safe passage to a non-extradition nation in exchange for manually disarming the server cluster. He viewed the murder of Laura Vance in 1979 as a minor operational detail, a necessary action to protect a financial and political apparatus that he believed was far too powerful for any law enforcement agency to dismantle. However, Harrison had severely underestimated the depth of the forensic recovery accomplished during the raid on the Daly Center vault. Investigators placed a leather-bound binder onto the desk in front of the banker. The unedited, private journals of Judge Raymond Vance recovered from Vault 03. The journals contained precise, handwritten records proving that Harrison had personally authorized the financial liquidation and silent elimination of two former business partners in the late 1980s when they threatened to expose the syndicate's offshore tax shelters. Under federal racketeering statutes and murder-for-hire laws, those journals provided federal prosecutors with irrefutable physical evidence to issue immediate, non-bailable arrest warrants. Investigators placed the federal warrant on the desk beside the countdown monitor, presenting the banker with a stark choice: cooperate fully, provide the master administrative override to permanently disarm the Lakeshore 9 failsafe, or face immediate transfer to a federal maximum security facility where he would spend the rest of his life. Confronted with the irrefutable evidence of his own past crimes and realizing that his family's meticulous record-keeping had ultimately trapped him, the banker's composure completely collapsed. He surrendered the secondary biometric overrides and provided the administrative passkey required to access the central server cluster. Cyberforensics specialists executed the emergency shutdown command with less than 10 minutes remaining on the countdown clock, permanently severing the external satellite uplinks, seizing the master server drives, and purging the automated failsafe executable from global hosting nodes forever. The disarming of the Lakeshore 9 protocol represented the absolute, final destruction of the digital and financial architecture that had protected Laura Vance's killers for nearly half a century. Headlines around the world broadcast the news of the decisive victory. Chicago cold case digital threat disarmed. Master financial architect arrested in Northwoods raid. The shadowy web that had spanned from Lincoln Park to the subterranean vaults of the Loop and the wilderness estates of Wisconsin was permanently dismantled, leaving behind no secondary triggers, no secret servers, and no remaining shadows capable of threatening the peace that had been fought for so fiercely across decades. Returning to Chicago, lead investigators and retired officers walked through the quiet, sunlit paths of the Laura Vance Memorial Garden in Lincoln Park one last time. The neighborhood was alive with the sights and sounds of spring, flowers blooming along the stone paths, families walking along Clark Street, and students studying near the park entrance. They stood together beside the bronze memorial sculpture depicting open sketchbook pages transforming into birds taking flight toward the sky, looking at the inscription of Laura's name shining under the morning sun. The decades-long war against time, corruption, and dark power was finally completely over. The truth had conquered every vault, outlasted every conspiracy, and brought a permanent, unyielding light to the story of Laura Vance. The formal sentencing of Arthur Pendleton inside the Cook County Criminal Courts building and the public unveiling of the Laura Vance Memorial Garden were intended to mark the absolute, definitive conclusion of the 1979 Lincoln Park tragedy. The news cameras had packed up, the suburban political establishment had undergone its forced public penance, and the neighborhood had finally reclaimed its quiet, tree-lined streets. Yet, as digital forensic archivists and evidence custodians at Area 3 Police Headquarters began the painstaking procedure of logging physical artifacts for permanent archival transfer to the Illinois State Archives in Springfield, a disturbing spatial anomaly emerged within the cross-referenced GPS and cellular relay logs retrieved during the initial 2026 task force operations. Lead investigator Detective Marcus Vance, a seasoned cold case specialist who had worked alongside the retired Frank Callahan during the final push to arrest Pendleton, was conducting a deep-level audit of the financial records, tollway pass logs, and vehicle registration histories associated with Arthur Pendleton's real estate firm from the late autumn of 1979. While prosecutors had successfully built their capital murder case around Pendleton's movements on the night of November 12, 1979, tracing his path from Lincoln Park to the rural storage facility in Kane County, a secondary anomaly in regional telephone switching logs refused to align with Pendleton's written confession. On the afternoon of November 13, 1979, 24 hours after Laura Vance had been abducted and killed, Pendleton's primary office line at his real estate agency had remained completely silent for 6 continuous hours. Yet, a secondary, unlisted landline registered under an anonymous corporate holding entity had routed 3 encrypted long-distance calls to an isolated maritime industrial depot situated along the icy, desolate marshlands of the Calumet River on Chicago's far south side. The Calumet River Industrial Corridor in 1979 was a bleak, heavily polluted wasteland of rusting grain elevators, slag heaps, abandoned steel mills, and unpaved gravel access roads bordering the dark, freezing waters of Lake Michigan. It was a place where heavy industry dumped chemical waste under cover of night, and where illicit transactions occurred far away from the reach of routine police patrols. Detective Vance pulled the archived 1979 precinct dispatch logs for the 4th Police District, searching for any recorded incident or unassigned field call on the morning of November 14, 1979. Tucked deep inside the secondary annex of the district archives was a forgotten, unassigned field report detailing a burned-out 1975 Lincoln Continental discovered near an abandoned barge slip, its vehicle identification numbers systematically ground down with an industrial grinder, and its interior completely incinerated by a high-grade chemical accelerant. In 1979, the burned luxury sedan had been casually dismissed by local officers as a routine insurance fraud disposal or a gangland hit connected to Southside auto theft rings, completely unlinked to the missing persons report filed for Laura Vance miles away in Lincoln Park. But as Detective Vance cross-referenced the newly unsealed bank ledgers of Arthur Pendleton's former real estate firm, he discovered a wire transfer of $50,000 executed on November 14, 1979, drawn from an offshore trust in the Bahamas and paid directly to an unlicensed marine salvage and towing operator operating out of the port of Indiana. The realization hit the cold case team with chilling force. Arthur Pendleton had not acted entirely alone in the frantic, dark hours following the murder. He had hired a professional, high-level cleaner to eliminate secondary physical evidence, transport heavy staging tools, and sanitize the luxury vehicles utilized during the abduction and transport. The discovery sent a shockwave through the cold case unit, reigniting a secondary, covert investigation that threatened to pull down prominent figures across the Midwest who had long believed they were completely safe from the law. Detective Vance immediately initiated a multi-agency task force alongside the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Indiana State Police, diving deep into the history of the unlicensed marine salvage operation known on paper as Great Lakes Logistics Incorporated. The firm had been officially dissolved in 1985, but its founding director was a former Navy deep-sea diver and commercial salvage operator named Donald "Red" Gallagher, a man with a long history of contract work for organized crime syndicates and corrupt political fixers across the Great Lakes region. Gallagher was currently living under an assumed identity on a secluded, heavily fortified lakefront estate near Door County, Wisconsin, maintaining a lavish lifestyle financed by a series of monthly, automated wire transfers drawn from offshore trusts linked to the Van Sterling family network. Equipped with high-resolution satellite surveillance, thermal imaging arrays, and specialized underwater sonar equipment, federal agents and state troopers mounted a silent, high-stakes surveillance net around Gallagher's peninsula property, waiting patiently for the legal authorization required to execute a coordinated sweep of his private docks and subterranean boathouses. In mid-2027, under a sealed federal search warrant signed by a U.S. district judge in Chicago, a heavily armed tactical team from the FBI's hostage rescue team, supported by Coast Guard patrol craft, executed a dawn raid on the Door County estate. Simultaneously, specialized marine dive units descended into the dark, freezing waters surrounding Gallagher's private concrete pier. Using side-scan sonar and magnetic anomaly detectors, police divers located a submerged, heavy-gauge steel shipping container chained directly to the underwater rock footings of the dock 25 feet beneath the surface. When heavy marine winches hauled the steel container out of the water and onto the deck of a federal barge, forensic technicians used plasma torches to slice through the reinforced locking bars. Inside the dry, oil-sealed chamber lay a treasure trove of physical evidence that Pendleton had paid Gallagher a fortune to submerge forever. The original, blood-stained leather seat cushions removed from the 1975 Lincoln Continental, a set of custom tactical restraints, and a locked, waterproof Pelican case containing 6 encrypted magnetic tape spools dated between 1977 and 1980. The recovery of the underwater container transformed a single-solved cold case into one of the largest systemic corruption and obstruction probes in Midwestern law enforcement history. The encrypted magnetic tapes were brought directly to the FBI's Operational Technology Division in Quantico, Virginia, where cryptographers spent 6 weeks bypassing late 1970s commercial encryption algorithms. When the audio and video files were finally decrypted and rendered visible on high-definition monitors, analysts stared in utter horror at the contents. Detailed, hidden camera audio and video recordings captured inside Arthur Pendleton's private real estate office throughout 1979. The video files revealed that Pendleton had not only planned Laura Vance's abduction with terrifying precision, but he had actively consulted with a high-ranking legal advisor who had helped him navigate police inquiries in real time during the early weeks of the Area 3 search. That legal advisor was none other than former state senator and senior appellate judge Gerald Van Sterling, a celebrated political patriarch, legal scholar, and prominent philanthropist who had served as a key advisor to multiple state governors before his retirement in 2012. The recordings captured chilling, matter-of-fact conversations between Pendleton and the judge on the night of November 13, 1979. The senior judge could be heard advising Pendleton on how to handle police questioning, providing precise instructions on how to sanitize bank transfers, and recommending Donald Gallagher's marine salvage service to permanently destroy the primary physical transport vehicle. Gerald Van Sterling's voice on the tape was completely devoid of empathy or horror. He viewed the brutal murder of a 21-year-old student merely as a catastrophic political mistake that threatened his family's high society standing, real estate holdings, and judicial influence. The news of the unsealed recordings and the subsequent arrest of former Judge Gerald Van Sterling at his luxury penthouse in Chicago's Gold Coast exploded across international news outlets. Chicago 1979 cold case expands, retired appellate judge handcuffed in shocking cover-up conspiracy. The public sat in absolute disbelief as national news networks broadcast images of the elite former jurist being led into a federal transport van in handcuffs, his face shielded by his legal team as protesters gathered outside the federal courthouse on Dearborn Street. The trial of Gerald Van Sterling and Donald Gallagher at the Dirksen Federal Building became the most heavily covered judicial proceeding in modern Illinois history. The prosecution, led by Special Assistant U.S. Attorney Ellen Vance, no relation to the victim, though she carried the immense burden of prosecuting 2 of the region's most powerful former figures, presented the decrypted audiovisual files, the submerged physical evidence from Door County, and financial trails that spanned nearly 5 decades. During the explosive 7-week trial, prosecutors demonstrated how the Van Sterling family had weaponized their immense wealth, legal influence, and political connections to construct an impenetrable wall of silence around Arthur Pendleton. They showed how subtle pressure had been applied to mid-level police administrators in 1980 to scale down the Lincoln Park search unit, how specific leads pointing toward the Calumet River industrial sector had been systematically buried, and how offshore funds had been used to ensure that everyone who touched the physical transport evidence remained silent until their deaths. The defense team's desperate attempts to claim the recordings were obtained illegally or that the former judge was suffering from age-related memory impairment were soundly dismantled by expert medical testimony and pristine chain-of-custody documentation provided by Detective Vance's task force. On October 18, 2027, the jury returned unanimous guilty verdicts against both Gerald Van Sterling and Donald Gallagher for conspiracy to commit murder after the fact, obstruction of justice, and human evidence tampering. Gerald Van Sterling was sentenced to 25 years in federal custody, ensuring the 86-year-old former judge would spend the remainder of his life inside a high-security prison cell, his legal legacy thoroughly erased and replaced by permanent infamy. The absolute destruction of the Van Sterling shadow network brought an overwhelming, transcendent sense of justice to the family of Laura Vance and the entire city of Chicago. The investigation had proven that no matter how deep an evidence box is buried beneath the water, no matter how powerful the hands that build the cover-up, and no matter how many years pass in silence, the relentless march of truth and modern forensic science will eventually tear down the wall. Outside the federal courthouse, as a crisp autumn rain fell over the steel towers and busy avenues of the Loop, Detective Marcus Vance and retired Detective Frank Callahan stood together before a sea of news cameras. They officially declared that every single lead, every corrupt accomplice, and every hidden secret tied to the death of Laura Vance had been exposed, processed, and brought to justice. The long, dark night that had begun on a rain-slicked street in Lincoln Park in November 1979 was officially over, leaving behind a city that had faced its deepest horrors and emerged permanently transformed into the light. The explosive sentencing of former appellate Judge Gerald Van Sterling and Donald Gallagher inside the packed, marble-clad courtroom of the Dirksen Federal Building was heralded as the absolute, definitive conclusion to the legal nightmare surrounding Laura Vance. The public had cheered the fall of another corrupt pillar of the old political machine, marveled at the underwater recovery off the Door County coast, and celebrated the total exposure of a multi-generational cover-up. Yet, as federal marshals escorted the disgraced 86-year-old jurist away in heavy wrist restraints, Detective Marcus Vance sat alone in the quiet, fluorescent-lit basement office of the Area 3 Cold Case Unit, staring at a single physical item that refused to fit into the official narrative of the crime. On the stainless steel examination table lay the silver pendant with the cracked glass casing, the heirloom recovered from the concrete chamber in Kane County alongside Laura's remains. The forensic metallurgical reports from the state laboratory had confirmed that the pendant had sustained severe kinetic crushing forces during the 1979 attack, causing its internal clasp to bend at a precise 18-degree angle. However, when Detective Vance reviewed the high-definition macro photographs taken during the original 1979 crime scene processing of Laura's apartment near Lincoln Park, he noticed a detail that every previous investigator, including Frank Callahan, had missed under the dim incandescent lighting of the victim's hallway. In a photographic print depicting Laura's wooden entry table, taken at 10:30 a.m. on November 13, 1979, 13 hours after her reported abduction, a distinct, circular indentation in the thin layer of dust near her mail tray showed where a heavy, round object had sat for days before being suddenly picked up. Lying directly behind the indentation was a tiny, faded piece of paper, a parking validation stub from an underground municipal garage beneath the Cook County Administration building on Clark Street, stamped with an entry time of 11:45 p.m. on November 12, 1979. The math was instantly, terrifyingly wrong. If Laura had been abducted at 9:30 p.m. near Lincoln Park and murdered by Arthur Pendleton shortly after 10 p.m., how could a parking stub from a municipal garage downtown be stamped at 11:45 p.m. that same night? And why was there a clean impression in the dust on her desk, suggesting her silver pendant had been sitting in her entry hall after police officers had already secured the crime scene perimeter on the morning of November 13th? The realization sent a cold wave of dread through Detective Vance's chest. The written confession provided by Arthur Pendleton, which had aligned so smoothly with the genetic coffee cup match and the underwater shipping container, was incomplete. Pendleton had taken sole responsibility for the physical murder to protect a secondary, far more dangerous aspect of the crime, a detail so deeply embedded in the civic infrastructure of Chicago that even a life sentence in a maximum security penitentiary was preferable to exposing it. Detective Vance immediately subpoenaed the archived, low-resolution digital security logs and microfilm records from the Cook County Administration Building garage from the night of November 12, 1979. The magnetic backup tapes had been transferred to optical media during a county modernization drive in 2012 and sat uncatalogued in a municipal deep storage facility in Cicero. For 5 days, Vance and a team of 2 trusted junior analysts sat in a darkened room, scrubbing through thousands of pages of grainy entry registers and scanned security video frames. At 11:42 p.m. on November 12, 1979, a dark, late-model county-issued sedan pulled into the lowest basement level of the administration garage, far away from the public elevator banks and security cameras. The driver did not exit through the public doors. Instead, the driver used a master electronic key card to access a restricted maintenance portal marked City of Chicago, utility and freight access only. 3 minutes later, a second individual emerged from the utility portal, carrying a dark canvas duffel bag, and walked quickly toward the street exit leading out onto Washington Street. When Vance ran advanced facial enhancement algorithms over the single frame where the individual turned upward toward a secondary security dome, the digital enhancement revealed a face that made the air leave his lungs. The person carrying the duffel bag out of the administration utility portal at midnight was neither Arthur Pendleton nor Donald Gallagher. It was Chief Deputy Inspector Thomas Blake, the legendary, highly decorated former head of the Chicago Police Department's Internal Affairs Division, the man who had overseen the initial administrative audit of the Area 3 handling of Laura Vance's disappearance in December 1979. The investigation, which the public believed was fully resolved, had suddenly breached a new, terrifying threshold. The killer had not simply utilized a wealthy real estate developer and a corrupt judge to cover his tracks. The syndicate had operated an active, high-level law enforcement liaison who had physically entered the crime scene after the initial search teams had departed, planting staging evidence and altering the physical layout of Laura's apartment to ensure the police investigation would focus exclusively on a simple street abduction. Detective Vance did not log his discovery into the Central Police Database. Knowing that Thomas Blake, though retired since 2010, maintained deep personal and financial ties to senior personnel across multiple divisions, he bypassed standard departmental protocols entirely. He contacted the Illinois Judicial Inquiry Board and the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Public Corruption Task Force, requesting a private, off-the-record briefing with a special agent in charge at a neutral location outside the city. The meeting took place inside an unmarked vehicle in a quiet park-and-ride lot off the Interstate 294 corridor near Oak Brook. When Vance presented the garage logs, the dust impression photographic analysis, and the cross-referenced utility access records from November 1979, the Sachs expression turned to stone. The maintenance portal beneath the Cook County Administration Building did not lead merely to municipal water pipes. It was a key access point for the Loop Freight Tunnel Grid, a vast series of abandoned, deep underground utility tunnels originally constructed beneath the Central Business District in the early 1900s, running continuously beneath the city core from the river down to the South Loop. The pieces of a far larger, more sinister puzzle began to lock together with brutal clarity. Laura Vance had not been targeted solely because of Arthur Pendleton's predatory obsession. During her final semester as an architectural student at Northwestern University, Laura had been hired by a municipal urban planning firm to digitize historic city blueprints for a major underground transit expansion project. While processing architectural scans of the subsurface utility grid beneath Lincoln Park and the Central Loop corridor, she had accidentally discovered an unmapped, private structural modification, a series of reinforced, climate-controlled storage vaults excavated directly beneath county property, drawing unmetered power from the city electrical grid. These hidden subterranean chambers were being utilized by a high-level network of public officials, law enforcement directors, and corporate developers to store untraceable physical assets, black market contraband, and classified municipal records dating back to the late 1950s. When Laura realized the structural anomalies she was mapping were not historical transit remnants but active, high-security installations, she had saved the raw architectural files onto a magnetic tape drive, the very tape drive that Thomas Blake had retrieved from her apartment entry hall on the night of November 12, 1979, while her family was at the police precinct filing the missing persons report. Armed with this terrifying revelation, federal authorities launched a secret, militarized probe under total operational security, codenamed Operation Iron Grid. Using specialized ground-penetrating radar units concealed inside municipal utility vans, investigators scanned the subterranean corridor running parallel to Clark Street, pinpointing 3 massive, void-like structures buried 40 feet beneath the intersection of Clark and Washington Streets, less than 2 blocks from City Hall. On a freezing night in December 2027, an elite tactical unit from the FBI's hostage rescue team, accompanied by federal cyberforensic specialists and state investigators, executed a covert breach of the utility portal beneath the administration building. Equipped with night vision systems and heavy thermal cutters, the team moved silently through the dark, damp brick arches of the abandoned freight tunnel grid, their boots splashing through freezing water until they reached a heavy, industrial steel bulkhead door recessed into the subterranean rock. When tactical engineers cut through the electronic locking mechanism and breached the vault door, they stepped into a massive, climate-controlled facility that mirrored the dark sophistication of an offshore banking vault. Lining the reinforced concrete walls were rows of secure, metallic storage lockers, high-capacity server arrays running on private fiber optic lines, and climate-sealed display cases containing stolen cultural artifacts, unrecorded physical currency, and thousands of archived paper dossiers marked with the insignia of various municipal and state government agencies. Inside Vault 04, investigators recovered the ultimate, irrefutable smoking gun, Laura Vance's original, missing magnetic tape drive, sitting inside a sealed plastic pouch alongside Thomas Blake's private, handwritten operational journals from 1979. The journals detailed every phase of the operation, confirming that Blake had been paid over $2 million by a consortium of corporate developers to ensure that the existence of the subterranean storage grid remained hidden at all costs. When Arthur Pendleton had confronted Laura near Lincoln Park and the situation escalated into violence, Blake had used the chaos to execute a complete sanitation of her digital records, ensuring that her architectural discoveries were wiped from her university servers and personal devices before police technicians could analyze her apartment. The discovery of the subterranean vault beneath the loop sent an unprecedented shockwave through the highest levels of Midwestern law enforcement and government, shattering public trust in municipal institutions and triggering the largest internal police purge in the history of the region. Front-page headlines across North America captured the cinematic, terrifying scope of the revelation. Chicago cold case reveals Shadow City, secret subterranean vault unearths corrupt police network behind 1979 murder. Retired Chief Deputy Inspector Thomas Blake was arrested at his waterfront estate in Lake Forest by a joint federal task force, taken into custody without bail, and formally charged with high treason, obstruction of justice, and acting as an accessory to capital murder. Within 48 hours of his arrest, 8 additional high-ranking former municipal officials, corporate executives, and retired police commanders were taken into custody across Cook County, their assets frozen, and their legal immunity permanently revoked under federal racketeering statutes. The absolute exposure of the subterranean network brought the ultimate, definitive truth of Laura Vance's death out of the dark, transforming her memory from that of a helpless victim into that of an unsung, heroic whistleblower whose professional integrity had ultimately brought down a shadow system that had compromised the city for a generation. On a quiet, sunlit morning in early 2028, the city of Chicago formally permanently sealed the utility access portals leading to the subterranean vaults, filling the chambers with solid concrete slurry to ensure no human being would ever use those dark spaces again. Above ground, at the corner of Clark and Washington Streets, a permanent bronze memorial monument was dedicated in Laura's honor, depicting a young woman holding an architectural blueprint looking up toward the skyline, a symbol of courage, truth, and the unyielding power of light over the deepest shadows of the earth. Detective Marcus Vance and retired Detective Frank Callahan stood together at the edge of the dedication ceremony, watching as Laura's family placed flowers at the base of the monument. The long, terrifying road that had begun on a rain-slicked street in Lincoln Park 29 years earlier had finally reached its absolute, eternal end. The mystery was solved, the cover-up completely destroyed, the Shadow City erased, and the name of Laura Vance was forever restored to the light of justice. The permanent concrete backfilling of the subterranean vaults beneath the loop was meant to signal the absolute end of the shadow infrastructure that had claimed Laura Vance's life in 1979. The physical access points were sealed. Thomas Blake and his co-conspirators were locked away in high-security federal remand facilities, and the municipal government had launched a comprehensive public inquiry to rebuild institutional trust. Yet, as digital forensic archivists at the Federal Bureau of Investigation's National Cyber Command Unit began deep-level data recovery on the server arrays seized during the Operation Iron Grid breach, they uncovered a secondary, dormant digital protocol embedded within the vault's primary operating system. A protocol designed to activate automatically if the physical vault was breached or its power grid severed. Detective Marcus Vance, who had been formally seconded to the Federal Joint Task Force overseeing the national security implications of the network, received an urgent summons to the FBI field office in downtown Chicago. On the monitors inside the secure command facility, software engineers displayed an active, encrypted data transmission loop bouncing between secondary cloud nodes in Montreal, Reykjavik, and Frankfurt. The subterranean vault beneath Clark and Washington Streets had not operated in isolation. It was the primary Midwest relay node for a multi-jurisdictional, automated blackmail and intelligence archiving network codenamed Echo 7. The Echo 7 system was programmed with an automated dead man switch. Every 72 hours, the server cluster required a manual, encrypted administrative override, a multifactorial passkey held exclusively by the syndicate's master financial architect, an elusive 78-year-old former international banker named Arthur Pendleton Vance, a distant cousin of the disgraced Judge Gerald Vance Sterling. Arthur Pendleton Vance had lived in total luxury on a private, off-grid estate in the North Woods of Wisconsin near Lake Superior since 2010, operating as the silent custodian of the network's offshore accounts and digital failsafes. If the master administrative override was not entered into the system before the countdown timer reached zero, the Echo 7 protocol was programmed to execute an unencrypted, public release of over 50 terabytes of raw, highly sensitive wiretap recordings, compromised municipal land deeds, and covert surveillance logs to public networks worldwide. The potential fallout threatened to destabilize not only local municipal governance, but international diplomatic relations, financial markets, and active federal law enforcement operations across 3 countries. Realizing the catastrophic stakes, Vance, alongside an elite tactical team from the FBI's hostage rescue team, mounted an immediate, high-risk airborne operation into the Wisconsin wilderness under cover of a heavy northern blizzard. Flying beneath radar coverage in specialized tactical helicopters, the Joint Task Force executed a midnight assault on Arthur Pendleton Vance's heavily fortified estate, breaching the perimeter walls and securing the main residence within minutes. Inside the estate's subterranean security bunker, tactical officers secured Arthur Pendleton Vance at his main workstation, where the Echo 7 countdown clock showed less than 4 hours remaining before the global automated distribution sequence executed. Sitting in a leather armchair surrounded by heavily armed operators, the elderly banker remained utterly calm, offering a cold, arrogant smile. He informed Detective Vance that the master administrative passkey was protected by a dynamic biometric algorithm tied to a private biometric token, a token he claimed to have destroyed minutes before the tactical breach occurred. He demanded absolute immunity, the complete unfreezing of his offshore accounts in Switzerland and Liechtenstein, and guaranteed safe passage to a non-extradition nation in exchange for manually disarming the server cluster. He viewed the murder of Laura Vance in 1979 as a tragic, minor operational detail, an unfortunate necessity to protect a global financial and political apparatus that he believed was far too powerful for any law enforcement agency to tear down. However, Pendleton Vance had severely underestimated the depth of the forensic recovery accomplished during the raid on Thomas Blake's Lake Forest estate. Vance placed a single, leather-bound binder onto the desk in front of the banker. The unedited, private journals of Thomas Blake recovered from Vault 04. The journals contained precise, handwritten records proving that Pendleton Vance had personally authorized the financial liquidation and silent elimination of 2 former financial partners in Switzerland when they threatened to expose the syndicate's offshore tax shelters in the late 1990s. Under international criminal law and treaty agreements, those journals provided Swiss and federal authorities with irrefutable physical evidence to issue immediate, non-bailable international arrest warrants for capital murder, money laundering, and state-sponsor racketeering. Vance placed the federal arrest warrant on the desk beside the countdown monitor, presenting the banker with a stark, brutal choice: cooperate fully, provide the master administrative override passkey to permanently disarm the Echo 7 failsafe, or face immediate extradition to a maximum security isolation cell where he would spend the remainder of his natural life. Confronted with the irrefutable evidence of his own past crimes and realizing that his family's meticulous record-keeping had ultimately trapped him, the elderly banker's stoic composure completely collapsed. He surrendered the secondary biometric overrides and provided the administrative passkey required to access the central server cluster. Federal cyberforensics specialists executed the emergency shutdown command with less than 20 minutes remaining on the countdown clock, permanently severing the external satellite links, seizing the master server drives, and purging the automated failsafe executable from the global hosting nodes forever. The disarming of the Echo 7 protocol represented the absolute, final destruction of the digital and financial architecture that had protected Laura Vance's killers for nearly 5 decades. Front-page headlines around the world broadcast the news of the quiet, decisive victory. Chicago cold case digital threat disarmed. Master financial architect arrested in Wisconsin raid. The shadowy web that had spanned from Lincoln Park to the subterranean vaults of downtown Chicago and the wilderness estates of Wisconsin was permanently dismantled, leaving behind no secondary triggers, no secret servers, and no remaining shadows capable of threatening the peace that had been fought for so fiercely across nearly half a century. Returning to Chicago, Marcus Vance and retired detective Frank Callahan walked through the quiet, sunlit pathways of the Laura Vance Memorial Garden in Lincoln Park one last time as active members of the Joint Task Force. The neighborhood was alive with the sights and sounds of spring, flowers blooming along the stone paths, families walking along Clark Street, and students studying near the park entrance. They stood together beside the bronze memorial sculpture depicting open sketchbook pages transforming into birds taking flight toward the sky, looking at the inscription of Laura's name shining under the morning sun. The decades-long war against time, corruption, and dark power was finally completely over. The truth had conquered every vault, outlasted every conspiracy, and brought a permanent, unyielding light to the story of Laura Vance. The neutralization of the Echo 7 protocol and the surrender of Arthur Pendleton Vance inside his Wisconsin wilderness fortress was hailed by federal law enforcement as a masterclass in digital counterespionage and cold case resolution. The global news cycle, which had spent months fixated on the sensational collapse of the Vance Sterling political dynasty, slowly shifted its focus toward the approaching judicial proceedings. The city of Chicago seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief, watching as municipal crews completed the final surface work along the Clark Street corridor, paving over the last structural reminders of the subterranean utility portals. Yet, within the quiet, windowless basement archive of the Dirksen Federal Building, an unexpected legal crisis was quietly taking shape, one that threatened to undo the entire multi-year law enforcement effort on pure procedural grounds. Special Assistant U.S. Attorney Ellen Vance sat before a mountain of legal motions filed by a coalition of elite defense lawyers representing the surviving co-conspirators. The defense team, financed by residual offshore trusts that had escaped initial federal seizure, had filed a massive, unified constitutional challenge under the Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution. Their argument was as brilliant as it was ruthless. They claimed that the initial collection of the discarded paper coffee cup from the commercial dumpster in suburban Cook County, as well as the vacuum swabbing of the cigarette filter from 1979, constituted an illegal, warrantless search because the biological material had been extracted without a specific judicial warrant targeting Arthur Pendleton's genetic profile. According to the defense motion, if the initial touch DNA extraction from the discarded coffee cup was deemed a violation of constitutional privacy standards, then every subsequent lead, the genetic genealogy family tree, the surveillance on Arthur Pendleton, the recovery of Laura's remains in Kane County, and the subsequent raids on Door County, the Clark Street Vault, and the Wisconsin estate, represented the fruit of the poisonous tree. The defense argued that under federal constitutional law, the entire mountain of physical, digital, and recorded evidence was legally tainted and had to be excluded from the upcoming trials, which would force the immediate release of Arthur Pendleton, Gerald Vance Sterling, Thomas Blake, and Arthur Pendleton Vance. The legal threat sent a cold wave of panic through the highest levels of the Department of Justice. A special emergency legal task force was convened inside the federal courthouse, bringing together Detective Marcus Vance, retired Detective Frank Callahan, and senior forensic specialists from the FBI laboratory in Quantico. They had 48 hours to audit the original 1979 evidence logs and reconstruct the exact chain of custody for the cigarette filter recovered near Lincoln Park, searching for a single, legally ironclad detail that would prove the police had acted within constitutional boundaries during the initial 1979 sweep. Frank Callahan, digging through his personal, handwritten field notebooks from November 1979, spent an entire night reviewing every line of his daily entries under a magnifying glass. On page 112 of his third notebook, dated November 13, 1979, he found a tiny, overlooked detail that had never been transcribed into the official digital police database. On the morning after Laura vanished, Callahan had personally interviewed the city sanitation worker assigned to the Clark Street route, who had explicitly stated on tape that he had swept the paper cigarette filter out of the public gutter 3 yards outside Laura's front gate, meaning the item had been formally classified as abandoned trash on municipal property prior to its collection by forensic officers. This single handwritten entry, supported by the original 1979 cassette recording preserved in the Area 3 evidence vault, provided the prosecution with the exact legal anchor they needed. Because the cigarette filter and the subsequent coffee cup had both been formally identified as abandoned property recovered from public municipal thoroughfares and commercial refuse areas rather than private personal effects, the police possessed full legal authority under established Supreme Court precedent to perform forensic testing without requiring an individualized search warrant. During a tense, 3-day constitutional hearing before the Chief Judge of the United States District Court for the Northern District of Illinois, Ellen Vance presented the 1979 field notebooks, the original audio recording, and the pristine chain of custody logs. The Chief Judge issued a scathing, definitive oral ruling, completely dismissing the defense motions and upholding the absolute legality of the genetic genealogy evidence and every subsequent seizure. The last procedural hurdle had been obliterated, clearing the path for the final judicial accounting of the Vance Sterling network. Confronted with the irrefutable constitutional ruling and realizing that their legal avenues had completely evaporated, the remaining defendants abandoned their trial strategies. In a historic, joint court session that drew international media coverage, Arthur Pendleton, Gerald Vance Sterling, Thomas Blake, and Arthur Pendleton Vance walked into the main courtroom at the Dirksen Federal Building wearing heavy wrist restraints and orange transport suits. One by one, they stood before the judge, the victim's family, and a packed gallery to formally enter guilty pleas to charges of capital murder, federal racketeering, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. The court proceedings reached an overwhelming emotional peak during the victim impact statements. Laura Vance's younger sister, supported by her surviving family, stood at the central podium holding the silver pendant with the cracked glass casing that had been recovered from the concrete chamber in Kane County. Her voice, echoing clearly through the silent courtroom, was a masterclass in transcendent dignity and moral strength. She did not express hatred or demand vengeance. She spoke of the enduring, beautiful light of her sister's life, a light that had proven far stronger than all the money, power, and secret vaults in the world. "You buried my sister in the dark," she said, looking directly into the eyes of Arthur Pendleton and his co-conspirators. "You built vaults of concrete, hid behind titles, and bought silence with gold. But you forgot one simple thing. The truth is like a seed. You buried it, but it did not die. It grew until it broke through your concrete, tore down your walls, and brought my Laura home to the light." The presiding federal judge delivered maximum sentences to all defendants, ensuring that every single individual who had participated in the murder of Laura Vance or the subsequent multi-decade cover-up would spend the remainder of their natural lives inside maximum security federal penitentiaries with zero possibility of parole. As the gavel struck the wooden bench with a sharp, final report, a quiet, collective sigh rose from the gallery, a sound that carried the weight of nearly 5 decades of deferred justice finally finding its absolute mark. Outside the courthouse, as a bright autumn sun shone down over the steel spires and busy avenues of downtown Chicago, Marcus Vance and Frank Callahan stood together on the steps before a dense sea of news cameras. They officially announced that every aspect of the investigation was complete, every asset seized, every secret exposed, and every file permanently closed. The long, dark night that had begun on a rain-slicked street in Lincoln Park in November 1979 had officially, permanently ended, leaving behind a city that had faced its deepest, darkest secrets and emerged permanently transformed into the light of absolute justice. The reverberations of the final sentencing inside the marble courtroom at the Dirksen Federal Building had barely subsided when the grueling, methodical work of financial and institutional liquidation commenced across Illinois and the wider Midwest. The public had celebrated the dramatic legal fall of the Vance Sterling political machine and the arrest of Arthur Pendleton Vance, but for specialized asset recovery officers and forensic accountants operating out of the United States Department of the Treasury and the Illinois Attorney General's office, the physical and financial debris of the syndicate represented an immense, labyrinthine matrix requiring surgical dismantling. Every dollar, every land title, every shell company, and every private real estate trust that the syndicate had constructed over 6 decades had to be systematically seized, scrubbed of its dark origins, and repurposed for the public good. Lead investigator Detective Marcus Vance, alongside senior analysts from the Department of the Justice's Asset Forfeiture and Money Laundering Section and the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN, established a dedicated command center inside the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago on LaSalle Street. Their objective was absolute: to trace the multi-generational wealth of the conspirators back to its origins and ensure that not a single dollar remained hidden in offshore holding structures, Caribbean foundations, or private Swiss vaults. For 10 months, financial auditors exhaustively parsed thousands of banking ledgers spanning half a century, following digital and paper trails through Nassau, Geneva, Zurich, and the Cayman Islands. What they uncovered was a massive, shadow funding network that extended far beyond the immediate cover-up of Laura Vance's murder in 1979. The syndicate had systematically weaponized its immense capital to establish private academic endowments, judicial research fellowships, and municipal civic foundations across the Midwest. They had not merely hidden their violent crimes, they had quietly purchased systemic influence within the very educational, architectural, and legal institutions entrusted with shaping future generations of magistrates, urban planners, and law enforcement directors. The syndicate's dark money had secretly funded law faculty expansions, judicial ethics chairs, and police leadership seminars, building an invisible, institutional umbrella of protection that had subtly shielded their operations for over 40 years. The public exposure of this deep institutional compromise triggered a profound, voluntary reckoning across the academic, judicial, and cultural landscapes of the region. University boards, legal societies, and municipal councils across Illinois voted unanimously to strip the names of Pendleton, Vance Sterling, and their associated shell entities from every building, lecture hall, scholarship, and public park to which they had been attached. Hundreds of millions of dollars in seized assets were formally transferred to a newly established federal forfeiture fund, where they were combined with the liquidated proceeds from the Wisconsin Wilderness Estate, the Door County Peninsula property, the Kane County holdings, and the offshore Swiss accounts. Under sweeping federal and state legislation passed unanimously by the Illinois General Assembly and the United States Congress in late 2026, the entire multi-hundred-million-dollar asset pool was officially designated as the Laura Vance National Trust for Forensic Science and Human Rights. The trust was structured as an independent, non-governmental entity managed by a board comprising cold case homicide detectives, genetic genealogists, victim advocacy leaders, and surviving members of Laura Vance's family. Its sole mission was to provide permanent, high-tech forensic support, advanced touch DNA extraction, genetic genealogy mapping, and legal resources to cold case units and families of missing persons across North America, ensuring that financial limitations or institutional apathy would never again prevent an unsolved violent crime from being pursued to its absolute conclusion. In Chicago, the physical site of the former real estate office in suburban Cook County, the business location where Arthur Pendleton had originally operated and plotted his crimes, was acquired by local authorities under eminent domain. Following extensive structural remediation and environmental clearing, the private commercial structures were completely demolished, and the land was permanently incorporated into the surrounding forest preserve footprint. The space was transformed into an extension of the regional trail system, featuring a quiet, sunlit grove of native red oak trees, stone reflection benches, and a gently cascading natural water sculpture designed to harmonize with the serene Midwestern landscape. On a warm, clear evening in May 2027, the city of Chicago and Cook County hosted a formal dedication ceremony to mark the completion of the expanded memorial space and the official operational launch of the National Trust. Thousands of citizens filled the surrounding avenues, standing quietly under the budding canopy of oak and maple trees as a student orchestra from Northwestern University performed a solemn, breathtaking symphony composed in memory of Laura. There were no self-serving political speeches or grandstanding by public officials. The evening belonged entirely to the memory of a brilliant young student whose professional eye and moral integrity had ultimately reshaped the ethical foundations of her community. Laura Vance's younger sister stood before the gathering, looking out over the sea of candlelit faces with a calm, transcendent grace that moved the entire crowd to tears. She spoke not of the terror of November 1979, nor of the dark concrete vaults buried beneath the loop, but of the overwhelming, transformative power of truth, memory, and community. "When Laura was taken from us," she said softly, her voice carrying with crystal clarity through the silent evening air, "we felt as though we were condemned to walk forever in a cold, suffocating night. But over these past years, we learned that the night was never endless. Every detective who refused to let a file die, every scientist who examined a microscopic fiber, every citizen who lit a candle, you were all holding small lights in that dark. Tonight, those small lights have joined together to create a sun that will never set." As the applause echoed off the surrounding trees and neighborhood buildings, Detective Marcus Vance and retired Detective Frank Callahan stood together near the edge of the grove, watching the flickering candlelight reflect off the quiet paths. Frank Callahan, holding his original, worn leather notebook from November 1979, reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a pen, and turned to the final blank page of his entries for case 1979-1112. Under the warm light of a nearby lamp, he wrote two simple words across the yellowed page in firm, clear script: "Justice accompli." He closed the notebook, slipped it into a climate-sealed archive pouch, and handed it to Marcus Vance to be placed in the permanent historical collection of the National Cold Case Archive. 50 years I spent carrying this badge, Marcus," Callahan said quietly, looking back toward the sunlit memorial grove where children were laying white roses at the base of the stone monument. "I saw a lot of dark things on these streets. I saw men build fortresses of money, title, and concrete, believing they were completely untouchable. But standing here tonight, looking at what this city has become, I know the truth. The fortresses always crumble. The concrete always cracks, and the light always finds a way through." Marcus Vance smiled gently, looking up through the branches of the oak trees toward the clear, star-filled night sky over the Midwest. The city around them was peaceful, vibrant, and awake, its golden skyline glowing softly in the distance, its streets safe and quiet. The long, terrifying saga that had begun on an icy Monday night in November 1979 had reached its absolute, eternal terminus. The secrets were all exposed, the vaults permanently backfilled, the dark money dissolved, the co-conspirators imprisoned, and the name of Laura Vance was forever etched into the heart of the nation, a shining, unyielding symbol of truth, courage, and everlasting justice. Although the formal liquidation of the Vance Sterling estate and the dedication of the Laura Vance Memorial Garden marked the resolution of the physical, legal, and financial elements of the 1979 cold case, an unexpected secondary phenomenon began to unfold within academic, legal, and technological spheres across North America throughout late 2027. The comprehensive public disclosure of the multi-jurisdictional investigation, detailing the exact mechanics of how genetic genealogy, touch DNA extraction, marine sonar recovery, and subsurface radar had torn down a multi-decade shadow network, did not merely close a single file, it catalyzed a sweeping, systemic revolution in the methodology of international criminal justice. At the FBI Academy in Quantico, as well as the Illinois State Police Academy and police departments across the nation, the Laura Vance case was officially integrated into the core curriculum for advanced homicide, cyberforensic, and structural corruption training. Instructors utilized the digitized archives of the Area 3 Task Force, the Door County Marine Recoveries, and the Wisconsin Digital Operations to teach new generations of investigators how to identify institutional blind spots, the precise, dangerous moments when a department or municipal authority unconsciously resists a critical lead because it intersects with powerful political, financial, or internal interests. Inside the law faculties of Northwestern University, the University of Chicago, and Harvard Law School, legal scholars established the Vance-Callahan Seminars on Constitutional Integrity and Advanced Forensics. Law students exhaustively analyzed the 3-day constitutional challenge argued at the federal courthouse in Chicago, studying how the meticulous, handwritten field notes of Detective Frank Callahan from November 1979 had successfully defeated high-powered legal attempts to exclude genetic genealogy evidence under Fourth Amendment privacy protections. Laura Vance's uncompromising professional ethics, her absolute refusal to turn a blind eye when she discovered unmapped, illicit subterranean modifications on municipal blueprints, became the definitive national benchmark for ethical training across architectural, engineering, and legal disciplines. Meanwhile, the newly operational Laura Vance National Trust for Forensic Science and Human Rights, headquartered in a state-of-the-art facility on the Chicago waterfront, rapidly evolved into an international epicenter for cold case resolution. Equipped with ultra-high-resolution genetic sequencers, automated trace evidence vacuum chambers, and deep learning algorithmic cross-referencing engines funded by the liquidated syndicate assets, the center opened its doors to law enforcement agencies worldwide. Municipal police services struggling with decades-old unsolved homicides, unidentified human remains, and cold disappearances submitted their yellowed paper files, degraded biological samples, and untested physical evidence to the Chicago facility for advanced processing. In its initial year of full operation, the trust assisted international agencies in resolving 64 historic cold cases across the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, and Western Europe. Long-dead serial offenders were unmasked, missing persons were identified and returned to their grieving families, and innocent individuals who had lived under decades of false suspicion were permanently cleared. The trust operated under an absolute mandate. No service fee was ever charged to a victim's family or an underfunded police precinct, ensuring that financial limitations would never again dictate whether a human life received justice. Every solved file processed by the facility was dedicated directly to the memory of Laura Vance, transforming her legacy into an active, self-sustaining engine of global healing. For Detective Marcus Vance, his formal transition from active field operations to directing the operational framework of the Vance Trust brought a deeply satisfying, transcendent shift in his life's purpose. Sitting in his quiet, sunlit office overlooking Lake Michigan, he no longer spent his nights coordinating midnight tactical breaches, analyzing encrypted satellite pings, or facing down arrogant shadow brokers in remote wilderness bunkers. His daily work was dedicated to guiding young forensic scientists, reviewing revolutionary breakthroughs in molecular genealogy, and welcoming families who walked through the center's doors holding old, worn photographs of their missing loved ones, searching for the same absolute truth that had finally rescued Laura from the dark. Retired Detective Frank Callahan, living quietly in his modest home near Lincoln Park, found a serene, enduring peace that had eluded him throughout his 50 years on the force. Free from heavy leather notebooks, endless timeline charts, and the crushing weight of an unresolved murder that had haunted his middle age, he served as a senior advisor to the Trust's Investigative Review Board. Several days a week, he met with young homicide detectives, imparting the lost art of classic, intuitive police work, teaching them how to read the subtle cadence of human speech during interviews, how to respect the silent testimony of a crime scene, and how to maintain unwavering empathy for the victims whose voices had been violently silenced. On a brilliant, crisp morning in October 2027, the Trust hosted its inaugural International Symposium on Forensic Science, Civic Integrity, and Human Rights in downtown Chicago. Hundreds of leading forensic geneticists, federal prosecutors, human rights advocates, and cold case investigators from 24 nations gathered in the main auditorium of the new facility. The room was flooded with natural sunlight streaming through high floor-to-ceiling glass windows, reflecting off the polished granite floors and casting a warm, golden glow over the bronze memorial plaque mounted at the center of the main podium. The keynote address was delivered jointly by Marcus Vance and Frank Callahan. Standing together before the International Assembly, they did not dwell upon the terrifying reach of Gerald Vance Sterling, the dark sophistication of the subterranean utility vaults, or the tragic horrors of November 12, 1979. Instead, they spoke of the invincible, quiet power of ordinary human persistence, the thousands of unglamorous, meticulous acts of professional integrity performed by lab technicians, evidence archivists, patrol officers, and ordinary citizens who refused to let an unsolved crime sit forgotten in the dark. When those who built the Shadow Network buried their secrets beneath concrete and deep water, Frank Callahan said to the silent auditorium, his voice steady, deep, and resonant. They operated under the fatal delusion that money, status, and power were the absolute rulers of human destiny. They believed that if a vault is made deep enough and a cover-up constructed carefully enough, the truth will simply suffocate and cease to exist. But they fundamentally misunderstood the physical and spiritual nature of truth. Truth is not an object that can be locked in a steel container or drowned in 30 feet of water. Truth is a living, persistent light. You can attempt to cover it for a day, a year, or a generation, but the moment a single crack appears in the wall, the light will break through and consume the darkness completely. As the audience rose in a unanimous, thunderous standing ovation that echoed through the glass hall, Marcus Vance looked across the sunlit room toward the front row, where Laura Vance's sister sat surrounded by young forensic students, scientists, and cold case investigators. Outside, the clear autumn breeze rustled through the oak trees along the lakefront, carrying the clean scent of the water across a peaceful, vibrant city. The neighborhood of Lincoln Park, the avenues of Chicago, and the legal foundations of the nation were no longer defined by lingering shadows, unspoken dread, or hidden vaults. Chicago was a city wholly restored, a metropolis that had dragged its deepest, darkest secrets into the unyielding light of justice, leaving behind an eternal, shining testament that truth, courage, and love will forever endure. The inaugural symposium of the Laura Vance National Trust for Forensic Science and Human Rights was widely heralded as the definitive, triumphant curtain call on a nearly 50-year nightmare. The legal challenges were dismantled, the financial reserves reallocated, and the North American law enforcement community had adopted the Vance-Callahan protocols as the gold standard for cold case forensics. Yet, as the crisp autumn breeze of late 2027 gave way to the sharp, biting frosts of early November, an unrecorded physical anomaly uncovered during the final structural clearing of the former Vance Sterling family estate in the Fox River Valley forced Marcus Vance and Frank Callahan out of their quiet administrative routines and back into the dark underbelly of historical Illinois infrastructure. During the demolition of a non-load-bearing masonry wall in the sub-basement of the 19th-century Country Manor, a site that had been formally cleared by municipal surveyors months earlier, contractors broke through into an unmapped, dry-walled cavity recessed directly into the solid limestone bedrock. The vault was small, climate-controlled, and completely absent from any county land registry blueprint, property deed, or municipal utility map dating back to the late 1950s. Suspended from the reinforced vaulted ceiling by a heavy wrought iron chain was a single, sealed steel firebox equipped with a dual-key mechanical locking mechanism hand-forged in Germany in the early 1970s. Work was immediately suspended, and Detective Marcus Vance was dispatched to the Fox River Valley site. Within 2 hours, Vance, accompanied by Frank Callahan and a specialized forensic entry squad from the Illinois State Police, descended into the damp cellar. The air inside the subterranean chamber was thick with the scent of wet stone, aged mortar, and oxidized iron. Utilizing fiber-optic industrial cameras inserted through a drilled pilot hole, technicians verified that the steel box contained no explosive booby traps, though its interior was lined with dense lead sheets engineered to block early-generation X-ray inspection. When forensic locksmiths used high-torque diamond saws to cut through the hardened German lock, the lid opened with a heavy, metallic groan, releasing a puff of stagnant, ozone-scented air trapped inside for over 5 decades. Lying at the bottom of the lead-lined chamber were 3 physical items that froze the team in absolute silence: a set of original, hand-annotated land surveys from 1954 detailing the construction of the Chicago Transit Authority elevated line extensions, a leather-bound journal bearing the personal crest of former appellate Judge Gerald Vance Sterling's father, the patriarch who had established the family's legal empire in the mid-20th century, and a single, unspooled reel of 16mm black, white motion picture film preserved inside a sealed copper canister. The discovery sent a chilling wave of shock through the team standing in the dim cellar. The syndicate's shadow architecture had not been conceived by Arthur Pendleton in 1979, nor had it been initiated by Gerald Vance Sterling in the late 70s. The dark infrastructure that had claimed Laura Vance's life had been systematically engineered 3 generations earlier, built directly into the foundational transit and utility corridors of Chicago during the massive post-war modernization boom of the 1950s. The patriarch of the Vance Sterling family had used his position on municipal planning boards to deliberately alter underground transit tunnel alignments, creating hidden subterranean voids beneath key public properties, voids that were subsequently leased back to the city through shell corporations to house black market archives, corporate extortion files, and unrecorded financial assets for half a century. The 16mm film reel was transported under heavy armed escort to the Illinois State Archives Preservation Laboratory in Springfield, where technicians worked in a nitrogen-purged darkroom to clean, rehydrate, and digitally scan the fragile acetate emulsion. When the restored digital footage was rendered on high-definition monitors inside a secure viewing room at Area 3 headquarters, the video revealed a terrifying, unedited historical record captured in the autumn of 1956. The silent black and white footage showed senior municipal engineers, prominent corporate developers, and high-ranking judicial figures standing inside the newly excavated subway tunnels near LaSalle Street, inspecting the construction of the very subterranean vaults that would be uncovered 70 years later during Operation Iron Grid. Among the figures clearly identifiable in the 1956 film was Gerald Vance Sterling's father, standing beside a prominent municipal transit commissioner whose family had dominated Midwestern corporate real estate for 3 generations. The film proved beyond any shadow of a doubt that the cover-up of Laura Vance's murder in 1979 was not an isolated act of familial desperation to protect a predatory real estate broker, but the automated, systemic defense mechanism of an institutional conspiracy that had compromised the governance of the region for over 70 years. Laura had not merely stumbled upon a modern crime scene. Her professional eye for architectural anomalies had accidentally pierced the foundational lie upon which an entire regional establishment had built its power and prestige. The revelation of the 1956 film and the patriarch's private journals transformed the historical narrative of the entire case, forcing federal prosecutors and historical archivists to initiate a massive, retroactive audit of municipal governance, judicial appointments, and land development contracts spanning 7 decades. Front-page headlines across North America and international news networks broadcast the stunning, cinematic finale of the multi-year investigation. Chicago Cold Case exposes multi-generational shadow network. 1956 film reel reveals patriarchs built subterranean vaults during transit construction. Armed with the newly discovered 1956 land surveys and private journals, the Federal Asset Forfeiture Task Force filed secondary racketeering actions against 6 surviving corporate trusts and private investment funds linked to the original 1950s development consortium. The legal battle was swift and absolute. Confronted with the irrefutable historical film and the hand-annotated architectural blueprints, the corporate entities surrendered over $400 million in residual real estate holdings and commercial land titles along the Loop corridor. Every single dollar recovered from the secondary forfeiture actions was immediately transferred to the Laura Vance National Trust, expanding its operational scope from cold case forensic science into an international watchdog institute for public infrastructure transparency and municipal accountability. The trust established the Laura Vance Chair in Civic Integrity and Architectural Ethics at Northwestern University, ensuring that future urban planners, civil engineers, and legal scholars would be trained to recognize and expose the subtle mechanisms of structural corruption before they could ever again take root beneath the surface of a city. In late December 2027, as a soft winter snow blanketed the quiet avenues of Lincoln Park, a final, solemn ceremony was held at the site of the former Fox River Valley estate. The historic property, stripped of its dark walls and subterranean cavities, had been acquired by the state and completely transformed into a public urban forest and historic preservation park. Children played on the snow-covered paths, shoppers walked along the nearby avenues, and the bright winter sun reflected off the glass facades of downtown Chicago. Marcus Vance and Frank Callahan stood together at the edge of the new park, watching the snow accumulate softly on the bronze memorial plaque honoring Laura Vance. The long, dark chain of secrets that had begun in the subterranean subway excavations of 1956 claimed a bright young life in 1979, and hidden behind iron doors for decades had been utterly, permanently broken. There were no more hidden boxes, no more unmapped vaults, no more secret reels, and no more unanswered questions buried beneath the earth. Frank Callahan turned up his collar against the crisp winter wind, looking out over the peaceful park with a serene, unburdened smile that reflected a lifetime's ultimate fulfillment. 70 years, Marcus, he murmured softly, his voice carrying the quiet awe of a man who had watched the arc of history finally bend toward absolute justice. 70 years they thought they owned the ground beneath this city. But a 21-year-old architectural student with an eye for detail and an uncompromising heart tore their whole world down. Marcus Vance laid a hand on his old friend's shoulder, looking up at the clear, bright winter sky above the snow-covered trees. She didn't just tear it down, Frank. She built something that will stand forever. They turned and walked together down the quiet, snow-dusted sidewalk toward the transit station, their footprints crisp and clear in the fresh white snow. Behind them, the city of Chicago glowed brightly under the winter sun, a city freed from its longest shadows, healed of its deepest wounds, and forever guarded by the living, unyielding light of Laura Vance's memory. The formal surrender of the secondary corporate trusts linked to the 1956 Transit Development Consortium felt like the absolute, mathematical zero of the investigation. Every dollar had been accounted for, every land title transferred, and the historic film reels safely archived in the Illinois State Archives in Springfield. Yet, as the calendar turned to the early weeks of 2028, a single, persistent digital anomaly within the Federal Task Force's data recovery framework refused to settle into quiet resolution. Inside the high-security cyberforensics laboratory at the Laura Vance National Trust headquarters on the Chicago waterfront, Special Agent Marcus Vance sat before a high-resolution terminal running deep-packet algorithmic audits on the server backups seized from Arthur Pendleton Vance's Wisconsin wilderness bunker. While the primary Echo 7 protocol had been successfully disarmed during the initial tactical raid, an automated, non-standard digital handshake continued to ping an isolated, low-frequency radio terminal located in the rugged, uninhabited terrain of the Superior National Forest, a wilderness region located high in northern Minnesota along the Canadian border. The terminal did not route through commercial internet service providers, satellite constellations, or standard telecommunications grids. It operated on a vintage, high-frequency shortwave radio packet network originally constructed by the United States Department of Defense during the height of the Cold War, a network designed to survive electromagnetic pulses, orbital jammings, and total infrastructure disruptions. The realization sent a sudden, icy shock through the task force. The Van Sterling Syndicate had not merely relied on subsurface city vaults, offshore trusts, or modern cloud servers. They had repurposed a decommissioned, military-grade communication array buried deep within the granite bedrock of the North Woods to house an autonomous, physical offline archive. Vance immediately contacted retired detective Frank Callahan, who had spent decades studying the intersection of historical municipal infrastructure and military land concessions across the upper Midwest. Sitting in Vance's office, Callahan reviewed the topographic surveys of the Boundary Waters region, cross-referencing them with unsealed 1960s Defense Ministry land transfers. Tucked beneath an abandoned, overgrown fire observation tower near the Iron Range Basin was an underground concrete command installation constructed in 1962 under the guise of an emergency civil defense relay node. The property was registered to a long-defunct timber research company that had been managed by former appellate judge Gerald Van Sterling's father until his death in 1984. Recognizing that an overt military or law enforcement approach might trigger an automated thermal purge protocol inside the offline facility, Vance and Callahan assembled a specialized, light footprint team comprising tactical engineers from the Illinois State Police and wilderness survival specialists from the United States Forest Service Law Enforcement Division. Under cover of a heavy mountain freeze in late January 2028, the team boarded a specialized snow-capable transport, navigating through dense pine forests and frozen glacial lakes until they reached the base of the abandoned observation tower. The structure was shrouded in jagged ice and snow, its rusted iron framework groaning against the freezing northern wind. Beneath the floorboards of the rotting ranger cabin at the base of the ridge lay a heavy, counterweighted steel hatch concealed under 4 feet of packed ice and frozen slate. Using portable hydraulic spreaders and thermal cutting torches, tactical engineers breached the frozen locking mechanism, opening a narrow vertical shaft that led 80 feet down into the solid granite bedrock of the Superior National Forest. Descending the rusted iron ladder into the pitch-black void, the team stepped into a dry, climate-sealed chamber powered by a silent, continuous geothermal generator array that had been operating undisturbed for over 6 decades. The air inside was crisp, smelling faintly of old paper, electrical ozone, and refined machine oil. Lining the reinforced concrete walls were metal filing cabinets, magnetic tape spools, and high-capacity optical storage disks preserved inside vacuum-sealed glass vaults. Resting on a central wooden desk in the middle of the bunker was a leather-bound administrative logbook alongside an unencrypted high-definition optical drive marked with a single, handwritten label, Laura Vance, Complete Architectural Reconstruction, November 11, 1979. When forensic analysts connected the drive to a secure, air-gapped field workstation, the screen rendered a series of high-resolution CAD files, vector maps, and 3D architectural renders that Laura Vance had completed in the final 72 hours of her life. Laura had not merely discovered a single subterranean vault beneath the Daily Center or a few unmapped utility lines. She had mapped the entire master blueprint of the Shadow City. Her extraordinary genius as an architectural student had allowed her to synthesize fragmented, decades-old municipal scans into a complete, undeniable 3-dimensional model of the hidden subterranean grid running beneath every major government building, courthouse, and financial center across the entire Chicago metropolitan area. The files revealed that on November 11, 1979, the day before she was abducted, Laura had finalized a comprehensive digital dossier detailing how the hidden utility tunnels were being actively used to manipulate municipal real estate valuations, stage illegal high-stakes transactions, and move unmonitored cultural artifacts across the Midwest. She had saved the master reconstruction file onto a secondary, off-grid server node that Arthur Pendleton had spent nearly 50 years trying to locate and permanently erase. Pendleton and his judicial handlers had not killed Laura out of a sudden moment of random aggression. They had executed her because she had successfully decoded the master blueprint of their family's entire 7-decade empire. The discovery of Laura's complete architectural reconstruction in the Minnesota bunker provided the final, absolute, and undeniable proof of her immense, brilliant legacy. She was not a passive victim of a tragic circumstance. She was a master investigative mind whose professional work had uncovered the largest institutional conspiracy in modern Midwestern history. Her architectural renders were so precise, so impeccably documented, that federal prosecutors used them to initiate immediate, sweeping structural clearing orders for 14 secondary subterranean voids across the region, permanently eradicating every remaining physical trace of the syndicate's infrastructure. News of the discovery of the Minnesota bunker and the recovery of Laura's master architectural files flashed across global media networks, capturing the dramatic, cinematic culmination of the multi-decade saga. Chicago cold case reveals master blueprint. Minnesota bunker yields Laura Vance's complete architectural discovery from 1979. The global public stood in awe as the media presented Laura's original 3D renders, celebrating her as one of the most remarkable, courageous figures of the 20th century. Every file, map, and render recovered from the Minnesota facility was transferred to the permanent collection of the Laura Vance National Trust, where it was integrated into a public, interactive digital exhibit titled The Blueprint of Truth. Thousands of students, architects, and citizens walked through the exhibit, looking at the complex, brilliant maps that a 21-year-old architectural student had drawn in her quiet Lincoln Park apartment, maps that had ultimately brought down an empire and brought justice to a nation. On a clear, freezing evening in February 2028, Marcus Vance and Frank Callahan stood together on the roof observatory of the Trust headquarters, looking out over the glittering lights of Chicago and the vast, dark expanse of Lake Michigan. The northern wind was cold and clean, blowing away the last remnants of the past. The Minnesota bunker had been backfilled with concrete, its geothermal generators shut down, its steel hatch welded shut forever. There were no more offline arrays, no more hidden pings, no more secret files, and no more unanswered questions. Frank Callahan looked out at the city he had guarded for over 50 years, his coat wrapped tightly against the winter chill. A quiet, profound peace shone in his eyes, a peace that had taken nearly 50 long, agonizing years to find. "She saw the whole picture, Marcus," he said softly, his voice full of quiet reverence. "Before any of us even knew the vault existed, she mapped it all. She conquered them with a drawing pen." Marcus Vance smiled, his gaze resting on the bright, warm glow of the street lamps lining Clark Street in the distance. "She didn't just map their city, Frank. She built a new one." They stood together in the cold, quiet night, watching the lights of Chicago shine bright and unbroken beneath the winter stars, a city wholly liberated, permanently transformed, and forever illuminated by the brilliant, immortal light of Laura Vance. The final secure backfilling of the Minnesota Wilderness Bunker and the integration of Laura Vance's master architectural renders into the permanent collection of the Laura Vance National Trust marked the absolute completion of the physical, digital, and historical investigation. Every secret vault had been sealed with solid concrete, every offshore trust liquidated, every secondary communications link permanently severed, and every co-conspirator sentenced to maximum federal imprisonment. Yet, as the calendar progressed into the spring of 2028, an unexpected, profound institutional shift began to sweep through the administrative halls of municipal, state, and national governance across the United States, a transformation directly catalyzed by the public release of Laura's complete 3D architectural model. Inside the chambers of a Chicago City Council, as well as the Illinois General Assembly in Springfield and the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C., lawmakers convened to draft and unanimously pass the most comprehensive civic transparency legislation in the modern history of the nation, the Laura Vance Public Infrastructure and Civic Integrity Act. The legislation mandated that all subsurface utility maps, transit easements, architectural blueprints, and municipal real estate holdings across the country be fully digitized, subjected to automated spatial audits, and uploaded to an open-access public registry. The dark era of unmapped subterranean voids, secret leases, and private utility easements, the structural shadow world that the Vance Sterling family had exploited for over 70 years was permanently, legally outlawed. At Northwestern University, as well as the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, where Laura Vance had studied prior to her murder, the academic leadership officially unveiled the Laura Vance Center for Ethical Urban Design and Cultural Preservation. The center was established to educate future generations